Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Benjamin Crowfeather, and I've been a forest ranger for 9 years. People call me Ben. I work in the George Washington National Forest in West Virginia, in a place called Copper Creek Wilderness. It's beautiful country, thick woods, clear streams, and mountains that roll on forever. The water here has a funny orange color from all the copper in the rocks. Kids always ask me if it's safe to drink. I tell them yes, but it tastes like pennies. I'm part Cherokee, though my grandmother would say I don't act like it enough. She used to tell me stories about things in the woods, things that weren't quite human. I never believed them. After 4 years in the Army as a medic, then 9 years wearing this green uniform, I thought I'd seen everything the forest could throw at me. Bears, wildcats, lost hikers, even a few crazy people. But I never believed in the old stories. That was my first mistake. October in West Virginia is something special. The leaves turn every color you can think of. Red like blood, gold like coins, orange like fire. Hunters come from all over to chase deer and turkey through these hills. Most years, I like October. The air gets crisp, the bugs die off, and the forest feels clean and sharp. But October 1987 was different from the start. It started with the animals. I noticed it first on October 15th during my morning patrol near Copper Creek. The birds weren't singing. That might not sound like much, but when you spend your days in the woods, you notice when things go quiet. Birds always sing in the morning. Robins, cardinals, wrens. They make such a fuss you sometimes can't hear yourself think. But that morning, nothing. Just the sound of my boots on the trail and water running over rocks. The deer were acting strange too. I saw a doe standing perfectly still by the creek, just staring at me. When I got within 20 feet of her, she fettuhed. Nally ran, but not the way deer usually do. She didn't bound away in that beautiful, springy way deer have. She ran like a person pretending to be a deer, awkward and wrong. It made my skin crawl. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe a storm was coming, or maybe some hunter had spooked them earlier. Animals sense things we don't. But deep down, I knew something was off. The first hunters showed up 2 days later. Jim Hensley and his buddies from Ohio. They'd been coming to these woods for 10 years. Good guys who knew the rules and respected the forest. Jim always brought me coffee from town and asked about my family. His friends, Carl, Buddy, and Mike, were quiet types who minded their own business. But when I saw them at their camp that evening, something felt wrong. They looked like the same 4 men, but they were different somehow. Jim didn't offer me coffee. Carl, who usually barely said hello, was talking non-stop about nothing. Buddy kept scratching at his face like his skin didn't fit right, and Mike just stared at me with eyes that seemed too wide. "You boys having good luck?" I asked, trying to sound normal. Jim smiled, but it wasn't his smile. It was too big, showing too many teeth. "Real good luck, Ben. Best hunting we ever had. What kind of game you been seeing?" "All kinds," Carl said, then laughed in a high, strange voice. "All kinds of things running around these woods." I left their camp feeling sick to my stomach. Something was very wrong with those men. But what could I do? They looked like the hunters I knew. They had the same faces, the same voices. I couldn't arrest people for acting weird. That night, I called my grandmother. She lived down in Cherokee, North Carolina, and at 83, she was still sharp as a tack. She knew all the old stories, all the things our people used to watch out for. "Grandmother," I said, "what do you know about things that steal faces?" The line went quiet for so long I thought we'd been cut off. "Benjamin," she said finally, her voice low and serious. "Where are you calling from?" "The ranger station. Why?" "Hang up the phone, right now. Don't use it again unless someone's bleeding, and stay near running water, especially if it tastes of copper." "Grandmother, what are you—" "Hang up, boy. Some things don't like to be talked about over long distances. The phone went dead. I sat in my little office, staring at the silent radio and feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in 9 years of forest work. Outside, the October wind rattled the windows, and somewhere in the distance, something that might have been an owl called out in the darkness. But it didn't sound quite right either. The next morning, I decided to check on the hunters again. Maybe I'd imagined how strange they'd seemed. Maybe I was just tired or stressed. That's what I told myself as I hiked the 2 miles to their camp. I found Jim first. He was sitting by their cold fire pit, still wearing the same clothes from yesterday. When he saw me coming, he stood up and waved like nothing was wrong. But he moved like a puppet with loose strings, jerky and unnatural. "Morning, Ben," he called out. "Beautiful day for hunting?" It was, actually. The sun was shining through the colored leaves, making everything look like a church window. But Jim's cheerful voice didn't match his face. His smile was painted on, fake as a store dummy. "Where are your friends?" I asked. "Oh, they went out early, real early, before the sun came up." Jim's head tilted to one side like a curious dog. "They're having such good luck. Found some real nice game." "What kind of game?" "The kind that walks on 2 legs, Jim said, then laughed like he'd told a funny joke. My hand moved toward my radio, but Jim shook his head. "No need to call anyone, Ben. We're all having such a good time out here. Such a good time." That's when I noticed his neck. There was a line around it, like a seam where 2 pieces of cloth had been sewn together. It was thin and hard to see, but it was there. A line that went all the way around, just below his jaw. "Jim," I said carefully, "how long have you boys been camping?" 3 days, he said. But yesterday he'd told me they'd just arrived. Or maybe 4. Time goes funny in the woods, doesn't it, Ben? Sometimes you lose track of who you are. I backed away slowly. I should check on the others. "They're busy right now," Jim said. "Real busy. But they'll be back soon. We're all going to have dinner together tonight. You should come, Ben. Bring your appetite." I turned and walked away, trying not to run. Behind me, Jim called out, "See you soon, Ben. Real soon." I made it about half a mile before I had to stop and throw up. Something was horribly wrong with Jim Hensley. That wasn't the man I'd known for 3 years. That was something wearing Jim's face like a mask. I spent the rest of the morning trying to raise the sheriff's office on my radio, but all I got was static. The phone lines at the ranger station were dead too. A tree must have fallen on them during the night. It happened sometimes during storms, though I couldn't remember any storm. By noon, I was starting to panic. I needed help, but I was 40 miles from the nearest town, and my truck was making funny noises I didn't like. If I tried to drive out and broke down, I'd be stranded. If I stayed, I'd be alone with whatever was pretending to be Jim. That's when I decided to track the other hunters. I'm good at tracking. It's part of my job. Animals leave signs everywhere they go. Footprints, broken branches, disturbed leaves, scent trails. People leave even more signs because they're not trying to hide. Carl, Buddy, and Mike had left plenty of signs. Their trail led deeper into the forest, toward the old copper mines that gave Copper Creek its name. The prints looked right. Boot treads, I recognized, the right spacing for each man's stride. But something felt off about the trail. It was too neat, like someone had been very careful to make exactly the right prints. I followed the trail for 2 hours, deeper into country where hunters rarely went. The trees got thicker, the creek got louder, and the copper smell got stronger. I was beginning to think I'd lost them when I heard voices ahead. I crept forward, staying low and quiet like my army training had taught me. Through the trees, I could see 3 men standing by the creek. They looked like Carl, Buddy, and Mike, but they were doing something that made my blood freeze. They were washing something in the water, something big and red and floppy. At first, I thought it was a deer hide. Hunters sometimes clean their kill by the water. But as I got closer, I realized what I was looking at. It was a human skin, a whole human skin, turned inside out like a sock. They were washing the blood off it while they talked in low, excited voices. "This one was easy," said the thing that looked like Carl. Didn't even scream much. The ranger's next, said Fake Buddy. He's been asking too many questions. Save the best parts, said the mic thing. The face is always the hardest to get right. I watched in horror as they held up the skin, examining it like a coat they were thinking of buying. I could see that it had once been a person, arms, legs, a head with long hair. A woman. That's when one of them looked right at me. Well, well, Fake Carl said, smiling with too many teeth. Look what we have here. I ran. I crashed through the woods like a spooked deer, branches tearing at my uniform, roots trying to trip me. Behind me, I could hear them coming, not running like men, but moving fast through the trees in ways that didn't sound human. I made it back to the ranger station just as the sun was going down. My hands shook so bad I could barely get the key in the lock. Once inside, I shoved a chair against the door and checked every window twice. The phone was still dead. The radio was still full of tick. And somewhere out there in the October darkness, things that wore human faces like clothes were hunting for me. I sat in my office with my service pistol in my lap and tried to make sense of what I'd seen. But some things don't make sense. Some things are just horrible and true and waiting in the dark. That's when I remembered my grandmother's words. Stay near running water, especially if it tastes of copper. The ranger station was only 50 yards from Copper Creek. Maybe that's why they hadn't come for me yet. Maybe running water really did keep them away, like in the old stories. But I couldn't stay there forever. And when morning came, I was going to have to face whatever those things really were. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound made me jump. Wind in the trees, creek water over rocks, my own heartbeat. Twice I thought I heard voices calling my name from outside, but when I looked through the windows, I saw nothing but darkness. When the sun finally came up, I felt like I'd been awake for a week. My coffee tasted like metal, and my hands still shook when I tried to drink it. But I had to do something. People were dead. Probably that woman whose skin I'd seen. Maybe others. And those things were still out there, wearing faces they'd stolen. I decided to hike to the old copper mines. If these creatures, flesh weavers, my grandmother would have called them, were living anywhere, it would be someplace dark and hidden. The mines had been abandoned for 60 years. Perfect for things that didn't want to be found. I loaded my pack with everything I could think of. Extra ammunition, first aid supplies, emergency flares, and a handful of copper pennies I found in my desk drawer. It sounds crazy, but after what I'd seen, I was willing to try anything. The trail to the mines was steep and overgrown. I'd only been there once before, years ago, when some callouts. Each kids got lost, exploring. The entrance was blocked with old boards and warning signs, but the boards were rotten and easy to move aside. The mine tunnel went back into the mountain for maybe 100 feet before opening into a natural cave. Water dripped from the ceiling and everything smelled like copper. And something else. Something rotten and sweet that made my stomach turn. That's where I found the first body. It was a young woman, maybe 25, with dark hair and hiking clothes. She was lying against the cave wall like she was sleeping, but her face was gone, not cut off or torn away, gone, like it had been carefully peeled off in one piece. The rest of her was untouched. I knew I should be sick. I should have run away screaming. But after 4 years as an army medic, I'd seen enough death to keep my head clear. What I felt instead was anger. Cold, clean anger at whatever had done this to her. There were more bodies deeper in the cave. 6 that I could count, maybe more in the shadows. Men, women, even one who couldn't have been older than 16. All of them had their faces missing. All of them looked like they'd died quietly, without a fight. That's when I heard the voices. They were coming from deeper in the cave, where the darkness was so thick my flashlight barely made a dent. Multiple voices, but they were all saying the same thing. Ben Crowfeather. Come deeper, Ben. We want to meet you. The voices sounded like people I knew. My mother, my ex-wife Sarah, my old army buddy Martinez, who died in a training accident 3 years ago. They were using voices from my memory, trying to trick me into the dark. Come on, Ben, said Martinez's voice. It doesn't hurt. You just go to sleep. I backed toward the cave entrance, keeping my flashlight pointed ahead. That's when I saw them moving in the shadows. Things that looked like people but moved wrong, like they weren't used to wearing human shapes. One of them stepped into my light, and I almost screamed. It was wearing Jim Hensley's face, but the face didn't fit right. The Eddie just didn't line up properly, and I could see raw muscle underneath where the skin pulled tight. When it smiled, the face wrinkled like wet paper. "Hello, Ben," it said in Jim's voice. "We've been waiting for you." I pulled out my pistol and fired 3 shots. The bullets hit center mass, just like I'd been trained. The Jim thing stumbled backward, but didn't fall. Black blood oozed from the holes in its chest, but it kept smiling. "That's not very friendly," it said. More of them came out of the shadows. I saw the woman's face from the cave, stretched over something that definitely wasn't human. I saw faces I didn't recognize, probably other victims I hadn't found yet. They surrounded me, moving with that same jerky, puppet-like motion I'd noticed in fake Jim. "You can't kill us with bullets, Ben," said the thing wearing the young woman's face, "but we can wear your face much better than you do." I threw one of the copper pennies at the nearest one. When it hit the creature's arm, there was a hissing sound like bacon in a hot pan. The thing shrieked and jumped backward, the stolen skin smoking where the penny had touched. "Copper!" I shouted, pulling out the rest of the pennies. "You don't like copper." I threw them as fast as I could while backing toward the cave entrance. Each coin that hit one of the creatures made them scream and retreat. Their stolen faces began to bubble and peel where the copper touched them. But I only had so many pennies, and there were a lot of them. I made it to the cave mouth just as my ammunition ran out, both bullets and copper. The creatures followed, but they stopped at the entrance, hissing and snarling like angry cats. Something about the daylight, or maybe the running water nearby, kept them from coming after me. "This isn't over, Ben," called the Jim thing. "We know where you live. We know where you work. We'll find you when you're about. Not expecting it." "And when we do," added another voice. This one sounded like my grandmother, which made my blood run cold. "We'll wear your face so much better than you ever did." Ran all the way back to the ranger station, crashing through the forest like a madman. By the time I got there, the sun was starting to go down again, and I realized I had maybe an hour of daylight left. That's when I saw the truck parked outside the station. It was a sheriff's cruiser, and Deputy Martinez, not my dead Army friend, but a local cop with the same last name, was sitting inside, talking on his radio. When he saw me coming, he got out and waved. "Ben, thank God, we've been trying to reach you for 2 days." I stopped running and studied his face carefully. He looked normal, tired and worried, like a cop who'd been working too many hours. But after what I'd seen, I couldn't trust anyone. "How do I know you're really Martinez?" I asked. He looked confused. "What do you mean?" "Ben, you don't look so good. Maybe you should sit down. Tell me something only Martinez would know." "Okay." He thought for a minute. "Last month, you caught me speeding on Route 33, but you let me off with a warning because my wife just had a baby. Her name's Sophia, and she was born 3 weeks early. Is that enough?" I relaxed a little. That sounded right, but I kept my distance anyway. "Martinez, I need you to listen to me very carefully. There are things in these woods that steal people's faces and wear them like masks. They've killed at least 7 people that I know of, maybe more, and they're hunting me." Martinez stared at me for a long moment. Then he reached for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7. I need a welfare check and possible medical assistance at the Copper Creek Ranger Station. Subject appears to be suffering from exhaustion and possible hallucinations." "No!" I grabbed his arm. "Don't call anyone else out here. You don't understand. They can look like anyone." "Ben, you need help. When's the last time you slept? Eaten a real meal?" He was right about that. Felt like I was falling apart. But I also knew what I'd seen. "Just stay close to the creek," I said. "And if you have any copper on you, coins, jewelry, anything, keep it handy." Martinez looked like he thought I'd lost my mind, but he was a good cop and he agreed to stay with me until morning when we could call for backup. That was his last mistake. As the sun went down, we heard voices calling from the forest. Familiar voices. My grandmother. Martinez's wife. People we cared about. All asking us to come into the woods. Jesus, Martinez whispered. How are they doing that? They steal more than just faces, I told him. Stay near the water. But it was too late. The flesh weavers were done playing games. As full darkness fell, they came for us. Dozens of them, wearing faces they'd stolen over the years. And this time, they weren't afraid of the creek water. This time, they were hungry. The first attack came from the west, where the forest was thickest. Martinez had his flashlight pointed that direction when we heard something big crashing through the underbrush. When the light hit it, we both froze. It looked like Mrs. Patterson, the old woman who ran the general store in town. But Mrs. Patterson was 80 years old and barely 5 feet tall. This thing was 7 feet if it was an inch, with arms like tree branches and Mrs. Patterson's wrinkled face stretched over a skull twice the normal size. Boys, it said in her sweet grandmotherly voice, why don't you come on over here? I've got some fresh cookies waiting. Martinez drew his pistol with shaking hands. That's not possible. Shoot it, I said. Copper bullets won't kill them, but it'll slow them down. He fired 3 times. The Mrs. Patterson thing stumbled but kept coming, black blood running down its chest. More shapes moved in the darkness around us. Dozens of them, all wearing faces. I recognized from town, the mailman, the librarian, kids from the local high school. They've been taking people for years, I realized out loud, replacing them slowly, one at a time. Ben, Martinez said, his voice tight with panic. How do we stop them? Before I could answer, something grabbed him from behind. It was wearing the face of his wife, Maria. But the body was all wrong. Too tall, too thin, with joints that bent the wrong way. Honey, it said in Maria's voice, I've been looking everywhere for you. Come home with me. Maria? Martinez lowered his gun, confusion and hope battling in his eyes. But you're home with Sophia. I missed you so much, the thing said, wrapping arms like steel cables around his chest. Let me give you a kiss. That's not your wife, I shouted, but it was too late. The creature's face split open like a flower, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. It bit down on Martinez's neck, and I heard him scream as something vital tore open. I emptied my clip into the thing, but it held on to Martinez until he stopped struggling. Then it dropped his body and turned to me with Maria's blood-covered face. Now it's just you and me, Ben, it said, just like old times. But I'd never seen this creature before in my life. It was wearing memories that didn't belong to it, trying to confuse me with fake history. More of them closed in from all sides. I could see Jim Hensley's stolen face, and Carl's, and Buddy's. I saw the young woman from the cave, her face now stretched over something with too many arms. I saw people from town, from my past, from my nightmares. And at the back of the pack, I saw my grandmother. She looked exactly like I remembered, small and weathered, with silver hair in 2 long braids and eyes like black stones. But she was standing perfectly straight instead of hunched over her cane, and when she smiled, it was full of predator teeth. Benjamin, she said in the voice I'd known since childhood, you should have listened to the old stories better. My grandmother is in North Carolina, I said, backy, and toward the creek. She's probably asleep in her own bed right now. Is she? The fake grandmother tilted her head. Are you sure? When's the last time you actually saw her? I tried to remember. It had been months, maybe 6, maybe more. We talked on the phone, but I hadn't visited since last Christmas. A cold fear started growing in my chest. We visited her in July. The creature continued, reading my face. Such a sweet old woman. She told us so many interesting stories while we worked on her. Stories about you, about copper, about all the old protections. Very helpful. You're lying. Am I? It laughed with my grandmother's voice. "She's wearing my face now, boy. Wearing it much better than she ever did." The pack moved closer, backing me toward the creek. I could hear the water running over rocks behind me, smell the copper tang in the air. My grandmother had told me to stay near running water, especially water that tasted of copper. But she'd also told me some things don't like to be talked about over long distances. What if that phone call hadn't been my grandmother at all? What if they'd already taken her by then? "Don't look so sad," fake grandmother said. "You'll see her again soon. We'll put you both in the same skin suit. Won't that be nice?" I was at the creek's edge now with nowhere left to run. The water was running high from recent rains, brown with copper sediment and moving fast. I could feel the spray on my back. That gave me an idea. "You know what, grandmother?" I said, reaching into my pocket for my last emergency flare. "I think you're right. The old stories are important." I pulled the flare and struck it against the igniter. Red fire bloomed in the darkness, and every one of the creatures took a step back. They didn't like fire any more than they liked copper. "But you forgot one of the stories," I continued, holding the flare high. "T, he one about how flesh weavers can't cross running water, especially water with copper in it." "That's just a story, boy," fake grandmother snarled, but I could see uncertainty in the stolen eyes around me. "Is it?" I grinned, feeling crazy and desperate and maybe a little bit hopeful. "Let's find out." I dove backward into the creek. The water was shockingly cold and deeper than I'd expected. The current caught me immediately and swept me downstream. I could hear the creatures howling behind me, but when I looked back, they were all standing at the water's edge, unable or unwilling to follow. I let the creek carry me for maybe half a mile before I managed to grab a fallen tree and pull myself to the bank. I was soaked, freezing, and my flare had gone out, but I was alive. More importantly, I was on the other side of running water from the flesh weavers, but I couldn't stay there forever, and I still didn't know how to stop them. That's when I remembered something else from the old stories. Something about copper and fire and the way certain metals could burn things that shouldn't exist. The creek was full of copper sediment. The old mines had tons of copper ore just sitting in piles. If I could get enough copper, heat it up, and find a way to spread it around. The abandoned mine equipment was still there, rusted but maybe still working. There were old smelting furnaces, tools, even some copper wire and pipes. If I could get a fire hot enough, I could melt copper and make weapons that might actually hurt these things. I spent the rest of the night preparing for war. By dawn, I had a plan that might work, if I was lucky, if the old equipment still functioned, and if the flesh weavers were really vulnerable to molten copper the way the stories suggested. As the sun came up, I could see them on the other side of the creek, wearing their stolen faces and waiting for me to make a mistake. They couldn't cross the water, but they could wait. They had all the time in the world. But I had something they didn't expect, the determination of a man who'd seen too much death and was tired of running. It was time to take the fight to them. The old smelting furnace took most of the morning to get working, but the copper ore melted just like it had 60 years ago. I made crude molds from creek mud and poured the molten metal into bullets, arrowheads, and small throwing spikes. It was dangerous work. One splash of molten copper could take off a finger, but it was better than feeling helpless. By noon, I had enough copper weapons to outfit a small army. The real test would be whether they worked better than the pennies. I didn't have to wait long to find out. The flesh weavers tried to cross the creek just after sunset, when the copper-colored water was hardest to see. I was waiting for them with a crossbow I'd rigged to fire copper bolts. The first one to try was wearing Jim Hensley's face. It stepped into the water confidently, then started screaming as the copper-rich creek began to eat through its stolen skin like acid. By the time it reached the middle, there was nothing left but bones and black slime floating downstream. The others learned fast. They started throwing rocks and branches into the creek, trying to build a bridge. But every piece of debris that touched the copper water dissolved within minutes. That should have been the end of it. The creatures couldn't cross running water full of copper, and I had enough weapons to hold them off indefinitely. But I'd forgotten something important. They were smarter than I'd given them credit for. Around midnight, I heard voices from upstream. Human voices, calling for help. Real voices, not the stolen ones the flesh weavers used. "Help us!" someone screamed. "Please, we're trapped!" I grabbed my flashlight and followed the sound. A quarter-mile upstream, I found them. 3 people in hiking gear, standing waist-deep in the creek with something dark and horrible between them and the shore. They were using the copper water as protection, just like I had, but they were trapped there. "Thank God," one of them called when she saw my light. "We've been in here for hours. Those things killed our friends and chased us into the water." I studied them carefully through my binoculars. They looked real enough, cold, scared, exhausted. But after everything I'd been through, I couldn't take any chances. "Tell me your names," I called out. "I'm Jennifer Walsh," the woman said. "These are my brothers, Mark and David. We're from Pittsburgh. We were just camping." "How long have you been hiking in this area?" 3 days. We were supposed to go home tomorrow." It sounded right. Their gear looked authentic. Their fear seemed genuine, and they were standing in copper water that would have destroyed any flesh weaver instantly. I made my decision. "Stay in the water. I'm coming to get you." I waded out with a rope, keeping my copper bolt crossbow ready. The 3 hikers looked exactly like they should. Dirty, scared, normal people who'd stumbled into a nightmare. Jennifer was maybe 30, with short brown hair and hiking boots. Her brothers were younger, college-aged, with the kind of soft faces that said they spent more time with books than camping gear. "Are you a ranger?" Mark asked as I helped him toward shore. "We tried to radio for help, but..." "Radio's been dead for days," I said. "Don't worry, I'll get you out of here." But as soon as they stepped out of the copper water, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. Jennifer's face began to slide sideways, like a mask that wasn't glued on properly. Mark's skin started to bubble and peel, revealing raw muscle underneath. David opened his mouth to speak, and dozens of needle-sharp teeth spilled out. They'd been wearing the skins of real hikers, but the copper water hadn't hurt them because they weren't actually touching it. They were standing on their victim's bones. "Surprise, Ben," Jennifer Thing said, as her stolen face fell off completely. "We told you we were smarter than you thought." Fired 3 copper bolts before they could grab me. The shots hit center mass, and this time the creatures didn't just stumble. They screamed like nothing I'd ever heard and began to dissolve, their stolen skins melting away to reveal the horrible truth underneath. They weren't just wearing human faces. They were hollow, walking skin suits with nothing inside but darkness and hunger. When the copper bolts pierced them, they deflated like punctured balloons, leaving nothing behind but empty skin and the smell of burned meat. More shapes moved in the forest around me. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Every person who'd gone missing in these woods over the years, every face they'd stolen, every life they'd ended, all of them coming for me at once. I ran for the old mine where I'd set up my real trap. The smelting furnace was still running, pumping molten copper through a system of pipes I'd rigged around the mine entrance. When the flesh weavers followed me inside, I triggered the release valve. Liquid copper sprayed everywhere, walls, ceiling, floor. The creatures caught in the stream simply ceased to exist, their stolen bodies dissolving instantly. The ones that weren't hit directly began to retreat, but I'd already sealed the other exits. There was nowhere to run. It took 15 minutes to clear the mine. 15 minutes of screaming, melting, and the terrible sound of things that should never have existed, finally dying. When it was over, the only things left were piles of empty skin and the smell of copper and death. I spent the rest of the night burning the skins in a bonfire fed by copper shavings. Each one that burned revealed the face of someone who'd died in these woods. Hikers, hunters, campers, maybe even other rangers. People who'd come to enjoy the forest and never made it home. When dawn broke, I finally felt safe enough to hike out and get help. The sound. Official reports said wild animals had killed the missing people. Mountain lions, maybe, or a pack of feral dogs. The sheriff's department found Deputy Martinez's body and declared it an animal attack. The 7 corpses from the mine were listed as victims of exposure and predation. Nobody wanted to hear about flesh weavers or stolen faces or things that wore human skin like clothing. So I kept quiet and let them believe what they wanted to believe. But I know the truth. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear voices calling from the forest. familiar voices that don't belong to anyone living. I requested a transfer after that. I work in a different forest now, in a different state, far from any place called Copper Creek. But I keep copper coins in my pocket wherever I go, and I never camp anywhere that doesn't have running water nearby. Because the old stories are true, even if nobody wants to believe them. And there are things in the deep woods that are always hungry, always hunting, always looking for new faces to wear. I tried calling my grandmother after it was all over. The phone rang and rang, but nobody answered. I drove down to Cherokee the next weekend and found her house empty, with a for sale sign in the yard. The neighbors said she'd moved to Florida to live with relatives, but my grandmother didn't have any relatives in Florida. She didn't have any relatives anywhere, except me. I still don't know if that last phone call was really from her, or if the flesh weavers had already taken her by then. I try not to think about it, but sometimes I wonder if somewhere out there, something is wearing my grandmother's face and telling stories to other hunters, other rangers, other people who stumble into places they shouldn't go. The forest is beautiful, and I still love my job. But I've learned to listen for the warnings. When the birds go quiet, when the deer act strange, when familiar voices call from the darkness. My name is Rebecca Starweaver, and I've been a park ranger for 15 years. I know that sounds like a made-up name, but it's real. My dad was Cherokee, and my mom was a hippie from California. That's how I ended up with a name that sounds like something from a fantasy book. I work in the Great Smoky Mountains, in the parts where most people never go. My job is different from other rangers. I study sounds, not just any sounds, the natural music of the wilderness, birds singing, water flowing, wind through trees. I have special equipment that records everything and turns it into pictures on my computer screen. Sound waves, they call them. Before I became a ranger, I worked in Nashville making records. I spent 10 years in dark studios listening to singers and instruments through big headphones. But I got tired of fake music and decided I wanted to hear real music, the kind nature makes every day. Lost Valley is my favorite place to work. It's hidden deep in the mountains, and you can only get there by climbing down a dangerous cliff path. Most rangers won't go there because it's too risky. But I love it because the valley has perfect acoustics. That's a fancy way of saying sounds carry really well there. The rock walls make a natural bowl that catches every noise and bounces it around like a ping-pong ball. The Cherokee people who lived here first called it the place where voices stay. I learned that from my friend Joseph Crow Feather, who works at the Tribal Museum. He told me his great-grandmother used to warn people about going there alone. She said voices would follow you home. I thought that was just an old story. I should have listened. It was March 1979 when everything started. The winter was ending, but it was still cold at night. Fog rolled through the mountains every morning like ghost fingers. I was working on a big research project about how mountain acoustics change with the seasons. That Tuesday morning, I got a call from Dr. Sarah Chen at the University of Tennessee. She was excited about something. "Rebecca, you need to hear this," she said. "We were reviewing the recordings you sent us from Lost Valley. There are voices on the tape, human voices, but according to your logs, no one else was in the valley that day." I thought she was joking. Maybe I picked up a radio signal? Sometimes the equipment does weird things. No, these aren't radio voices. They're calling specific names. And Rebecca, some of these names match missing persons reports from the area. People who disappeared in those mountains over the past 20 years. My coffee got cold while she talked. The idea that my recordings had caught something impossible made my stomach feel tight. "I'm sending a team up there next week," Dr. Chen continued. "We want to set up more equipment and do a proper investigation. Can you guide us?" I said yes, but I wasn't sure I wanted to go back to Lost Valley. Something about those voices being on my recordings felt wrong, like accidentally taking a picture of something that wasn't supposed to be there. The week passed slowly. I kept thinking about what Dr. Chen had said, missing people's names on my recordings. I pulled out the files of people who had vanished in the Smokies over the years. There were more than I expected. Tommy Martinez, age 23, disappeared while hiking in 1975. last seen heading toward Lost Valley. Jennifer Walsh, age 31, vanished during a camping trip in 1977. Her tent was found 2 miles from the valley entrance. David Running Bear, age 19, Cherokee tribal member, disappeared in 1978 while collecting traditional plants. His family said he knew those mountains better than anyone. The list went on. 12 people in 4 years, all last seen near Lost Valley. I called Joseph Crow Feather. Joe, I need to ask you about something. That story your great-grandmother told about Lost Valley. What exactly did she say? There was a long pause. She said there were things in that valley that collected voices. They would steal the sound right out of your throat and use it to call other people. She said if you heard someone calling your name from the valley, you should run the other way. Did she say what these things looked like? She called them echo hunters. Said they looked like people made of air and sound. You could only see them when they moved, like heat waves on a hot day. And they had mouths like black holes that swallowed every sound that went in. I hung up the phone with my hands shaking. Old stories were just stories, right? There had to be a logical explanation for voices on my recordings. But that night, I had trouble sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined black mouths in the darkness, waiting to steal my voice. Dr. Chen's team arrived on Monday morning. There were 4 of them, Dr. Chen herself, a young graduate student named Lisa, and 2 researchers named Tom Bradley and Marcus Webb. They had equipment I'd never seen before, digital recorders that could catch sounds humans couldn't hear, and computers that could analyze sound waves in real time. The plan is simple, Dr. Chen explained as we hiked toward Lost Valley. We'll set up a grid of recording devices around the valley and monitor them for 48 hours. If there really are unexplained voices, we'll catch them. The hike down to the valley took 2 hours. The cliff path was slippery from morning dew, and I had to help the city researchers navigate the tricky parts. Tom Bradley kept making jokes to cover up how nervous he was. So, Rebecca, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are we to get eaten by a bear? He asked. Bears aren't what you should worry about, I said. I meant it as a joke, but nobody laughed. The valley looked the same as always, a perfect bowl carved out of gray stone with a small creek running through the middle. Pine trees covered the slopes, and morning fog made everything look soft and dreamlike, beautiful and peaceful. We set up equipment at 6 different spots around the valley. Each recorder was connected to a central computer that Tom carried in his backpack. Lisa tested the system by clapping her hands. The sound bounced off the rock walls and came back to us 3 times, each echo a little quieter than the last. Perfect acoustics, Dr. Chen said. If anything makes a sound in this valley, we'll record it. We worked through the morning setting everything up. By lunchtime, the system was running and we were ready to wait. The plan was to take shifts, 2 people awake at all times, monitoring the equipment while the others rested. Tom and I took the first watch. We sat by the computer, watching the sound wave patterns scroll across the screen. For the first few hours, we only recorded normal wilderness sounds: wind through trees, water flowing over rocks, a hawk calling from somewhere high above us. This is actually kind of boring, Tom said around 3 o'clock. Maybe those voices were just radio interference after all. That's when we heard it, a voice, clear as day, calling from across the valley. Tom? Tom Bradley? Is that you? Tom went completely still. The voice sounded exactly like his mother. Did you hear that? He whispered. I nodded. The computer screen showed the sound spike. Someone had definitely called his name. Tom, honey, I've been looking for you. The voice came again, from a different direction this time. It sounded worried, like a mother who'd lost her child in a crowd. Tom stood up, his face pale. That's impossible. My mother lives in Ohio. She doesn't even know I'm here. But he started walking toward the sound anyway. Tom, stop. I grabbed his arm. Something's wrong about this. The voice called again, closer now. Tom, why won't you answer me? I'm scared. That's what. And I saw it. At the edge of the tree line, something that looked almost like a person but wasn't quite right. It was see-through, like looking at someone underwater, and when it opened its sumdes mouth to call Tom's name, the mouth was just a black hole in its face. "Tom, don't look," I said. But it was too late. He saw it too. The thing that looked like a person made of air and shadows, with a mouth like an empty space in the world. Tom screamed. The thing moved toward us, gliding over the ground without walking. As it got closer, I could see through it to the trees behind. It wasn't really there, not in the way normal things are there. "Run," I said. We ran back to camp, crashing through the bushes like scared deer. Dr. Chen and the others were already awake, looking confused and frightened. "What happened?" Dr. Chen asked. "There's something out there," Tom said. His voice was shaking. It looked like my mother, but it wasn't. Marcus checked the computer readings. The equipment recorded everything. The voice calling Tom's name registered at normal human vocal frequencies. But there's something weird about the sound pattern. It's too perfect, like someone played a recording. Lisa was staring at the screen. "Look at this." The voice had no background noise, no breathing sounds, no echo from the valley walls. It's like the sound came from nowhere. We spent the rest of the afternoon going over the recordings. The voice calling Tom's name was definitely there, clear and loud. But when we analyzed it with the computer, it didn't match any normal human speech pattern. It was artificial somehow, like a very good copy of the real thing. As evening came, we set up a defensive camp near the valley's exit. Nobody wanted to admit we were scared, but we all stayed close together. We kept the recording equipment running, but now we were more worried about what it might catch. Just after sunset, the voices started again. First, someone called Lisa's name in her father's voice. Then Marcus heard his ex-wife calling for him. Dr. Chen heard her dead son, asking why she had left him. Each voice was perfect, exactly right, saying things that would make the person want to respond. And each time we could see those see-through figures at the edge of our vision, moving closer. They're using our voices against us, I realized. These things record people somehow, and then use their voices to hunt. "That's impossible," Dr. Chen said, but she didn't sound convinced. "Is it?" I asked. "We have machines that record voices and play them back. What if something else figured out how to do the same thing?" Marcus was checking his equipment with shaking hands. "The computer is picking up sounds that shouldn't exist, voices with no source, calls coming from empty air." That's when Tom started walking toward the tree line again. "Tom, where are you going?" Lisa called. But Tom wasn't listening to us anymore. He was listening to something else, his mother's voice, calling him home. "Tom, stop!" I yelled. But he was already 20 feet away, walking toward the dark trees like he was in a trance. I ran after him with Dr. Chen and the others right behind me. The see-through figures were everywhere now, drifting between the trees like smoke. Each one had that terrible black hole for a mouth. I tackled Tom just as he reached the tree line. "Tom, that's not your mother." He fought against me, his eyes wide and strange. "Let me go. She needs me. She's been looking for me." The voice came from right above us now. "Tom, honey, why is that woman hurting you? Come to Mama." But when I looked up, there was nothing there except empty air and pine branches. Dr. Chen helped me drag Tom back to camp. He struggled the whole way, reaching toward voices only he seemed to hear clearly. When we got back to our equipment, Marcus was staring at the computer screen with a shocked expression. "Look at this," he said. "The sound readings are off the charts, but they're not coming from any direction. It's like the voices are being generated right here in camp, right next to us." Lisa was crying quietly. "That was my father's voice. But my father's been dead for 3 years. They're collecting voices," I said, remembering Joseph's story. "The Cherokee called them echo hunters. They steal voices and use them to hunt people." "That's just a legend," Dr. Chen said. But she was whispering now, afraid to speak too loud. "Is it?" I asked. "What if those missing hikers didn't just get lost? What if something took their voices, and now it's using them to catch more people?" As if to answer my question, a new voice called from the darkness. "Help me, please help me. I'm lost." It was a young man's voice, full of fear and pain. The computer showed it was coming from the north side of the valley. "That could be someone who really needs help," Lisa said. "Or it could be a trap," I warned. But even I wasn't completely sure. The voice called again. "Is anybody there? I've been hurt. Please!" Marcus stood up. "We have to check. If there's really someone out there who needs help." "No," I said firmly. "That's how they get you. They make you think someone needs saving." But the voice was so convincing, so full of genuine terror. It tugged at something deep inside all of us, the part that wants to help people in trouble. Tom had stopped struggling and was sitting quietly, but his eyes kept darting toward the trees. "They're in my head," he whispered. "I can hear them talking to each other. They're planning something." Dr. Chen checked her watch. "It's only 8 o'clock. We have to make it through the whole night." That's when we realized our first real problem. The battery on our main computer was dying. The screen flickered and went dark. "How long do the backup batteries last?" I asked. Marcus checked the equipment. "Maybe 2 hours. After that, we'll have no way to monitor what's happening around us. Without the computer, we'd be blind and deaf to the things hunting us. We'd have no warning when they got close." "We need to leave," Dr. Chen said, "right now." But when I looked toward the cliff path that led out of the valley, I saw them. Dozens of the see-through figures standing along the trail like guards. Their black mouths were open, and I could hear a low humming sound coming from them. "They've blocked the exit," I said. We were trapped. The voices got louder and more desperate as the night went on. People calling for help, children crying for their parents, family members pleading for us to come find them. Each voice was perfect, exactly what would make us want to respond. Lisa broke first. Around 10 o'clock, she heard her little sister calling her name. The voice sounded terrified, like a child lost in the dark. "Lisa, I'm scared. Where are you? Help me." Lisa stood up and started walking toward the sound, tears streaming down her face. "That's not your sister," I said, grabbing her arm. "You don't understand," Lisa sobbed. "She died when she was 8. Car accident. I was supposed to be watching her, but I was on the phone with a boy. If I had been paying attention..." The voice called again. "Lisa, why did you let me die? Why didn't you save me?" Lisa screamed and tried to break free from my grip. "Let me go! I have to help her this time." It took all 3 of us to hold her down. She fought like a wild animal, desperate to reach the voice that was torturing her with guilt. That's when Tom stood up quietly and walked into the darkness. By the time we noticed, he was already gone. "Tom!" Dr. Chen called. "Tom, come back!" But there was no answer. The forest had swallowed him completely. We found him an hour later at the bottom of a steep ravine on the far side of the valley. He was lying on his back on the rocky ground, staring up at the stars with wide, empty eyes. When Marcus checked for a pulse, Tom's heart was still beating. He was still breathing. But when Wishpos tried to talk to him, he didn't respond. His throat was completely unmarked. No cuts, no bruises, no sign of injury. But when Tom tried to speak, no sound came out. His voice was gone. "What did they do to him?" Lisa whispered. I had a terrible feeling I knew. The echo hunters had taken what they wanted. Tom's voice was theirs now, to use however they chose. We carried Tom back to camp, but it was no use. He was alive, but empty, like a radio with no signal. As we sat around our dying equipment listening to the voices calling from every direction, I realized something horrible. We weren't just trapped in this valley. We were being collected one by one, and soon our voices would join the others, calling to the next group of victims. The battery on our last recorder died at midnight, and the valley went completely quiet. That's when the real hunting began. In the complete silence, I could finally hear what was really happening in Lost Valley. The echo hunters weren't just copying voices, they were eating them. I could hear a soft sucking sound like air being pulled through a straw, coming from all around us. They were feeding on every sound we made, our breathing, our heartbeats, the rustle of our clothes. "Nobody talk," I whispered as quietly as possible. They're listening to everything. But even my whisper was too much. The see-through figures moved closer, drawn by the sound like sharks to blood. Lisa was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. The noise was tiny, but in the dead silence of the valley it sounded like gunshots. The echo hunters drifted toward her, their black mouths opening wider. Dr. Chen grabbed my arm and pointed toward the cliff path. Some of the creatures had moved away from the exit, following the sounds we were making. Maybe we could sneak past them. We helped Tom to his feet. He couldn't talk, but he could still walk. Moving as quietly as we could, we started creeping toward the valley wall. That's when I heard my own voice calling from behind us. "Don't leave me here. Rebecca, please don't leave me." It was my voice, but I hadn't said anything. One of them had recorded me from earlier and was playing it back, trying to confuse us. Then I heard Dr. Chen's voice. "Help me! Something's got me!" But Dr. Chen was right next to me, her hand clamped over her mouth in horror. The echo hunters were using our own voices against us now, creating a chorus of false distress calls. It was psychological torture, hearing yourself beg for help while trying to stay silent. We made it halfway to the cliff path when Marcus stepped on a loose rock. It clattered down the slope, echoing off the valley walls. Every echo hunter in the valley turned toward us. "Run," I said. We ran through the dark forest, crashing through bushes and jumping over fallen logs. Behind us I could hear them following. Not footsteps, but that terrible sucking sound getting louder and closer. Lisa tripped and fell hard. When she tried to scream, nothing came out. They had taken her voice while she ran, stealing the sound right out of her throat. Now 3 of us were voiceless, and Dr. Chen and I were the only ones who could still make any noise at all. We reached the cliff path, but the echo hunters were waiting for us. They formed a wall of transparent bodies, blocking our escape route. Their mouths were open so wide now that they looked like black tunnels leading to nowhere. "What do you want?" Dr. Chen shouted at them. Her voice echoed off the valley walls, and every echo hunter turned toward the sound. They began gliding toward us, and I could see the hunger in those dark mouths. That's when I understood. They didn't want to kill us. They wanted to keep us alive, but voiceless, trapped in this valley forever, unable to call for help or warn others away. But they had made one mistake. They had become so focused on collecting our voices that they'd forgotten about other kinds of sound. I pulled out my emergency whistle, the on. Every ranger carries for emergencies. It was designed to make a sound so high and sharp that it could be heard for miles. I blew the whistle as hard as I could. The sound was like a knife, cutting through the night. The echo hunters recoiled instantly, their see-through bodies flickering like bad television reception. The high-pitched shriek of the whistle seemed to hurt them. "The recording equipment!" I yelled to Dr. Chen. "The speakers! Turn the volume all the way up!" She understood immediately. We ran back to our campsite, where the recording equipment was still connected to battery-powered speakers. Dr. Chen grabbed the volume control and turned it to maximum. Then I blew the whistle directly into the microphone. The amplified whistle blast exploded from the speakers, bouncing off every rock wall in the valley and creating a feedback loop that got louder and louder. The sound was so intense it hurt our ears, but it was devastating to the echo hunters. They began to dissolve like smoke in the wind. Their mouths, which had been black holes, started to close. The stolen voices they had been carrying began to escape, dozens of voices calling out at once, finally free. I heard Tom Bradley's voice among them. Thank you for setting us free." But the sound was killing the speakers too. With a loud pop and a shower of sparks, the equipment died. In the sudden silence, only a few echo hunters remained. The weakest ones had been destroyed, but the strongest were still there, hurt but not defeated. Dr. Chen and I looked at each other. We had one chance left. "Together," I said. We both blew our emergency whistles at the same time, creating a harmony of high-pitched sound that rang through the valley like a bell. The last echo hunters flickered and faded, their stolen voices escaping in a rush of whispers and cries. For a moment, the valley was full of all the voices they had collected over the years. Dozens of people saying goodbye, saying thank you, saying they were finally free. Then, silence. Real silence this time. Not the hungry silence of two echo hunters, but the peaceful quiet of an empty valley. Tom, Lisa, and Marcus were sitting on the ground, looking confused but alive. They tried to speak, and sounds came out, rough and whispered, but real. "Did we win?" Tom asked, his voice barely audible. I tried to answer him, but when I opened my mouth, nothing came out. The final echo hunter had gotten me after all. My voice was gone. We made it out of Lost Valley just as the sun was rising. The cliff path seemed easier in daylight, and Tom, Lisa, and Marcus were getting their voices back bit by bit. They sounded like people getting over bad colds, but they could talk. I couldn't. Dr. Chen tried to convince me to go to a hospital, but what would I tell the doctors? That supernatural creatures had stolen my voice? They'd think I was crazy. Instead, I went to see Joseph Crow Feather at the Tribal Museum. "The echo hunters are gone," I wrote on a piece of paper. Joseph read it and nodded sadly. My great-grandmother said this might happen someday. She said if someone was brave enough to use sound as a weapon against them, they could be defeated. But the person who did it would have to give up their own voice as payment. "Forever?" I wrote. "She didn't know," Joseph said. "The old stories don't have an ending for this one." The university wanted to study what happened in Lost Valley, but there was no evidence left. The recording equipment was destroyed, and without voices, Tom, Lisa, and Marcus could only whisper about what they'd seen. After a few weeks, even they started to doubt their own memories. Dr. Chen published a paper about unexplained acoustic phenomena in mountain valleys, but it was full of scientific words that made our experience sound boring and normal. I went back to my job as a ranger, but everything was different now. I communicated with visitors using hand signals and written notes, some piao. People thought I was deaf and spoke to me very slowly and loudly, which would have been funny if I could laugh. The hardest part was the silence inside my head. I used to think in words, talking to myself all day long. Now, my thoughts were just quiet, like being in a library where even thinking too loud was forbidden. But there were good things, too. Without my own voice cluttering up my ears, I could hear the forest more clearly than ever before. I heard birds I'd never noticed, insects I'd never known existed, and the subtle changes in the wind that warned of coming storms. I became the best tracker in the Park Service. When hikers got lost, they called me because I could hear their movements from farther away than anyone else. My silence made me a better listener. 6 months after Lost Valley, I was hiking alone on a mountain trail when I heard something that made me stop cold. Someone was calling my name. "Rebecca! Rebecca Starweaver!" It was a man's voice, unfamiliar but friendly, coming from the forest ahead of me. A lost hiker, maybe, who had heard about the ranger who couldn't talk but always helped people find their way. I started walking toward the voice, then stopped. The Cherokee stories said that evil spirits could be destroyed, but they could also be reborn. What if some small part of the echo hunters had survived? What if they were learning to hunt again? "Rebecca, I need help. I'm injured." The voice sounded so real, so human, but I remembered another voice that had sounded just as real, calling Tom Bradley's name on that terrible night. I turned around and walked away. Behind me, the voice called my name again and again, getting more desperate each time. But I didn't look back. I had learned that some voices shouldn't be trusted, no matter how much they sound like they need help. When I got back to the ranger station, I wrote a report about possible echo hunter activity in the northern section of the park. I recommended that area be temporarily closed to hikers. My supervisor read the report and gave me a strange look. "Rebecca, this is just a report about someone calling for help. Why didn't you investigate?" I wrote on my notepad, "Some voices are too dangerous to follow." He shrugged and filed the report away, probably thinking I was getting paranoid in my old age. But that night, I called Joseph Crow Feather. "They're coming back," I wrote in a text message. He called me immediately. "Are you sure?" I tapped once on the phone for yes. "Then we need to warn people," Joseph said. "The old ways. Stories passed from person to person, so everyone knows not to follow strange voices in the mountains." I tapped twice for yes. Yes, absolutely yes. That's why I'm telling you this story now. Not because I want you to believe in monsters, but because I want you to be careful. If you're ever hiking alone and you hear someone calling your name from empty forest, don't answer. Don't go looking. Turn around and walk away. Some voices are hungry, and they're always looking for their next meal. I still patrol the mountains around Lost Valley, keeping people away from places where voices echo too clearly. I can't speak to warn them directly, but I can guide them toward safer trails. Sometimes, on very quiet nights, I think I can hear whispers from the valley. Faint voices calling, testing, seeing if anyone will listen. But the valley stays empty, and the voices stay trapped. As long as no one answers their calls, that's where they'll remain. Just remember, if you hear your name being called by a voice you don't recognize in a place where no one should be, keep walking, don't look back, and whatever you do, don't answer, because some echoes are better left alone. My name is Daniel Shadowbrook, and I've been a forest ranger for 12 years. I have a PhD in botany, and I've spent most of my adult life studying how trees talk to each other through their roots. The mycorrhizal networks, we call them, like the internet for forests. I thought I knew everything there was to know about plants. I was wrong. It was September 1984 when everything changed. I'd been assigned to survey the old-growth section of Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia, specifically the Panther Creek watershed. These were ancient trees, some over 400 years old, with root systems that stretched for miles underground. The canopy was so thick that radio signals couldn't get through, and the maze of fallen logs and dense undergrowth made it easy to get lost. The rain had been heavy that month. Everything was soggy and green, and the forest floor squelched under my boots as I made my way along the barely visible trail. I was looking for signs of disease in the old oaks when I heard the first report. "Ranger Station, this is Hiking Party 77 Alpha," the voice crackled through my radio during one of the few moments I had clear reception. "We're reporting strange sounds in Sector 12. Children's voices, but there's nobody out here." I keyed my radio. "This is Ranger Shadowbrook. Can you describe what you heard?" "Calling for help, like kids lost in the woods. But when we went to look, nothing there. No tracks, no sign anyone had been through." I told them to stay on the main trail and report to the station when they got out. Probably just echoes, I thought. Sound travels funny in dense forest. But over the next few days, more reports came in. Always the same thing. Children's voices calling from areas where no children should be. The descriptions were consistent. Young voices, scared, begging for help. But search teams found nothing. Then, Dr. Ruth Maple called from the university. Ruth was my old professor, and she'd been studying the same forest network I was surveying. "Daniel, I need you to look at something," she said. "I've been analyzing soil samples from your area. The nutrient levels don't make sense. There's too much phosphorus, too much nitrogen, like something's been heavily fertilizing the forest. Maybe runoff from farms uphill? No farms for 50 miles, and the concentration is wrong. It's not agricultural fertilizer, it's organic. Very organic." That got my attention. I spent the next morning collecting my own samples, going deeper into the forest than I'd been before. The trees here were massive, their trunks so wide that 3 people couldn't wrap their arms around them. Their roots created a network above ground, too, making walking difficult. As I worked, I noticed something odd about the soil. It was darker than it should be, almost black in places, and it had a smell. Not the clean earth smell of normal forest soil, but something richer, sweeter, like compost that had been sitting too long. I was kneeling down, scooping dirt into sample containers, when I heard it. "Help me." I froze. The voice was small, young, a child's voice. "Help me, please." It was coming from somewhere ahead, deeper in the forest. I stood up, listening carefully. The voice came again, weaker now. "I'm hurt. I can't move." I grabbed my first aid kit and headed toward the sound, pushing through the undergrowth. The voice kept calling, always just ahead, leading me deeper into the maze of ancient trees. "Where are you?" I called out. "Keep talking so I can find you." The voice went quiet. I stopped, looking around. I was in a small clearing surrounded by the biggest trees I'd ever seen. Their roots created walls around the open space, some as high as my waist. In the center of the clearing, the soil was too. Had strange dark color, almost black. That's when I saw the first one. In the bark of the nearest oak, about chest high, was a face, a child's face, pressed into the wood like it was trying to push through from the inside. The features were perfect. Small nose, closed eyes, mouth slightly open. But it was made of bark and wood grain, a natural formation that just happened to look exactly like a sleeping child. I stared at it for a long moment, then laughed at myself. Pareidolia, we call it, the human tendency to see faces in random patterns. Clouds, toast, tree bark. Nothing supernatural about it. But as I turned to leave, I could have sworn I saw the wooden lips move. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face in the bark. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was just my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong in those deep woods. The next day brought more reports. A hiking couple had gone missing in Sector 12, the same area where people had been hearing the voices. Their names were Tom and Lisa Hartford, experienced hikers from Pittsburgh. They'd checked in at the ranger station 3 days ago and hadn't been seen since. I volunteered for the search team. We spread out in a line and walked through the forest calling their names. It was slow going. The undergrowth was thick, and those massive root systems made straight-line searching impossible. "Over here," called Ranger Martinez from about 50 yards to my left. "I found their camp." We gathered at a small clearing where a blue tent was still standing. Their backpacks were inside, along with their food and water. Everything they'd need to survive. "They wouldn't just wander off without their supplies," Martinez said. I studied the ground around the tent. There were footprints leading away from the campsite, heading deeper into the forest. But something was wrong with the tracks. They started normal enough, but as they went on, they seemed to get shorter, closer together, like the people making them had been shrinking. "This wow." "Aye," I said, following the trail. The tracks led us through increasingly dense forest. The trees here were so big and close together that it was like walking through green tunnels. Overhead, the canopy blocked out most of the sunlight, creating a permanent twilight. About a quarter mile from the tent, I found Tom Hartford. He was standing upright against a massive oak tree, his back pressed to the bark. At first glance, he looked like he was just resting. But as I got closer, I could see that thin vines had grown around his wrists and ankles, holding him in place. More vines had sprouted from the ground around his feet, wrapping around his legs. "Tom!" I called out, running toward him. "Tom, can you hear me?" His eyes opened. They were clear and aware, but filled with terror. "Can't move," he whispered. "Been here. Days. It's growing. Into me." I looked closer and felt my stomach turn. The vines weren't just wrapped around him. They were growing into him. Where they touched his skin, I could see small puncture wounds, like thorns had pushed through. But these weren't thorns. They were tiny root hairs, feeding. "Martinez, get over here. I need the bolt cutters." I started trying to pull the vines away from Tom's arms, but they were surprisingly strong and seemed to tighten when I tugged on them. Martinez arrived with the cutters, and we began snipping through the green bonds. "Where's Lisa?" I asked Tom as we worked. He looked toward a cluster of trees about 30 yards away. "She tried to help me. It took her first." We found Lisa in a small depression between 3 oak trees. She was sitting cross-legged on the ground, her back straight, her eyes closed. Vines covered her completely from the waist down, and I could see bark beginning to form on her lower legs. Small leaves had sprouted from her arms, but she was breathing, slowly, peacefully, like she was sleeping. "Lisa!" Martinez shook her shoulder. "Lisa, wake up." Her eyes opened, but they weren't quite right. The irises had flecks of green in them, like chlorophyll was mixing with her blood. "It's beautiful," she said in a dreamy voice. "I can feel the whole forest, all the trees talking to each other. They're so old, so wise. They've been waiting for us." "We need to get her to a hospital," I said. But even as I spoke, I knew it was too late. The bark on her legs wasn't growing over her skin. It was replacing it. She was becoming part of the tree. Martinez was already on his radio, calling for a medical helicopter. But I knew the canopy was too thick for a landing. We'd have to carry her out. That's when the forest started moving. It was subtle at first, just a rustling in the leaves overhead, even though there was no wind. Then the vines holding Tom began to regrow as fast as we could cut them. The roots under our feet shifted and buckled, making it hard to keep our balance. And from somewhere deeper in the forest came the sound of children singing. A lullaby, sweet and haunting, that seemed to come from all directions at once. "We need to leave now," I said. We managed to get Tom free, though his arms and legs were covered in puncture wounds that oozed a greenish fluid. Lisa was harder. The bark had spread up to her waist and her roots had gone deep. When we finally pulled her free, she screamed, not in pain but in anguish, like we were tearing her away from something she loved. The singing got louder as we carried them out, and in the trees around us, I began to see more faces, dozens of them pressed into the bark, watching us with wooden eyes. Some looked like children, but others were older. Adults. All of them had their mouths open, as if they were the ones singing. We made it back to the ranger station just as the sun was setting. The medical team was waiting, and they loaded Tom and Lisa into ambulances. Tom would recover, though he'd bear the scars forever. Lisa was different. The doctors said she had some kind of plant moss, hit her in her bloodstream, changing her from the inside. She could talk, but all she wanted to discuss was going back to the forest. That night, I called Dr. Ruth Maple. "I think I know what's fertilizing your soil samples," I told her. Ruth arrived the next morning with a van full of scientific equipment. She was excited about the possibilities, evidence of plant consciousness, proof that trees could interact with human biology. She saw it as the discovery of the century. I saw it as something that needed to be stopped. "Daniel, you don't understand," she said, as we hiked back toward the deep woods. "If these trees have developed the ability to form symbiotic relationships with humans, it could revolutionize our understanding of plant intelligence. We could learn to communicate with them, to work together." "Did Lisa look like she was working together with anything?" I asked. She was being digested, slowly. Ruth shook her head. "You're thinking like an animal. Plants don't digest. They absorb nutrients and give back oxygen, shelter, beauty. It's cooperation, not predation." I stopped walking and pointed to a spot about 10 feet off the trail. "Then explain that." Jutting up from the forest floor was a human rib cage, bleached white by time. Moss had grown over most of it, and small saplings had sprouted between the ribs. But it was unmistakably human. Ruth went quiet as we found more bones. They were scattered throughout the forest, always in places where the soil was that dark, rich, black. Some were old, decades old based on the weathering. Others looked more recent. "The missing logging crews," I said. "The Native American legends about tree spirits. This has been going on for a long time." We set up Ruth's equipment in a clearing about a mile from where we'd found Tom and Lisa. She had sensors to measure electromagnetic activity, soil chemistry analyzers, and a audio equipment sensitive enough to pick up subsonic vibrations. The results were immediate and disturbing. "The trees are talking," Ruth said, staring at her readouts. "Look at this. Electromagnetic pulses moving through the root system in patterns. It's like a language." The audio equipment was picking up sounds too, low-frequency vibrations that were just below human hearing. When Ruth ran them through a computer program that shifted them up into audible range, we could hear what sounded like whispers. Hundreds of voices, all talking at once. "Can you make out what they're saying?" I asked. Ruth adjusted the settings, filtering out background noise. Slowly, words became clear. Hungry, so hungry. New growth, fresh soil, feed us. And underneath it all, that same lullaby we'd heard before. Children's voices, singing sweetly about roots and soil and sleeping under the earth. "We need to leave," I said. But Ruth was fascinated. "Don't you see? They're communicating with us. This is first contact with a truly alien intelligence. That's when the ground started moving. It began as a tremor, like a small earthquake. But then we could see the soil shifting, forming patterns. Roots broke through the surface, growing with impossible speed, reaching toward us like fingers. The trees around us began to change. Their bark rippled and flowed like water. Faces pressed up from inside the wood. Not just children now, but adults. Old people. All of them with their mouths open, singing that lullaby. Ruth, we're leaving. Now. But when I turned to grab her equipment, she was gone. I found her 20 feet away, standing perfectly still next to a massive oak. Vines had sprouted from the ground and wrapped around her ankles. As I watched, they grew higher, reaching her knees, her waist. Ruth! She looked at me with the same dreamy expression Lisa had worn. I can hear them, Daniel. They're so old, so wise. They remember when the first humans came to this forest. They've been waiting for us to evolve, to become ready for partnership. This isn't partner. Ship! It's parasitism! But even as I spoke, I could see the appeal. The forest was beautiful, ancient, peaceful. The lullaby was hypnotic, soothing. Part of me wanted to stop fighting, to let the vines wrap around me, to join that vast network of consciousness. I forced myself to move, grabbing a hatchet from Ruth's equipment bag. I started chopping at the vines, holding her, but for every one I cut, 2 more grew to take its place. The faces in the trees were getting clearer now. I recognized some of them. Missing hikers from years past, loggers from the old cruise. They were all singing, all smiling, all perfectly peaceful. But their wooden eyes followed me as I worked. You can't fight the forest, Ruth said. Her voice was changing, becoming deeper, more resonant. It's too big, too connected. Just let go, Daniel. Let it take care of you. The vines around her had reached her chest now, and I could see bark beginning to form on her legs. Small leaves were sprouting from her arms. In a few more minutes, she'd be lost forever. I made a decision that went against everything I'd been taught about forest preservation. I pulled out my flare gun and fired it into the nearest pile of dry leaves. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The singing stopped. The faces in the trees disappeared. The vines around Ruth withered and fell away as if they'd been poisoned. And from deep in the forest came a sound I'll never forget. A scream of rage and pain that seemed to come from the earth itself. Ruth collapsed, gasping and shaking. The green flecks were fading from her eyes, and the bark on her legs was cracking and falling away. "What did you do?" she whispered. "Reminded them what they're afraid of," I said, helping her to her feet. "Fire, the ancient enemy of forests. The one thing that could break their network, scatter their consciousness, reduce their power to ash and char." But as we gathered up her equipment and ran for the trail, I could hear the forest regrouping behind us. The fire would burn for a while, but these trees had survived forest fires before. They'd adapt, recover, and they'd remember who had hurt them. The singing started again as we reached the edge of the deep woods. Children's voices, sweet and innocent, calling for help. But now I could hear the hunger underneath, the patient malevolence of something that had been waiting centuries for the right prey. We made it to the ranger station just as the sun set. Ruth's equipment had recorded everything. Proof of plant intelligence, evidence of human-tree symbiosis, documentation of a forest consciousness. She wanted to publish her findings. I wanted to burn the whole forest down. Neither of us got what we wanted. The forest fire I'd started burned for 3 days before the rain put it out. When I went back to survey the damage, I expected to find charred stumps and dead earth. Instead, I found something far worse. The burned area had already begun to regrow, but wrong. The new saplings were growing in patterns, forming shapes that looked almost like symbols. And in the center of the burn zone, where the fire had been hottest, the soil was darker than ever, richer, more fertile. The fire hadn't destroyed the forest network. It had fed it. I was standing in the clearing where we'd rescued Tom and Lisa when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, expecting to see another ranger, but instead found myself face to face with a child. She looked about 8 years old, with dark hair and pale skin. She wore a simple white dress that seemed to glow in the dim forest light, but her feet were bare, and where they touched the ground, small roots sprouted. "Hello, Mr. Shadowbrook," she said in a voice like rustling leaves. "We've been waiting for you to come back." I backed away, reaching for my radio, but my hand found only empty air. The radio was gone, though I was sure I'd clipped it to my belt. "Looking for this?" The child held up my radio, though I hadn't seen her, moved to take it. "You won't need it where you're going." More children emerged from the trees around the clearing, dozens of them, all pale and glowing, all with roots for feet. Their eyes were the deep green of chlorophyll, and when they smiled, I could see bark instead of teeth. "You heard us," said a boy who looked about 10. The fire burned. It scattered our thoughts, broke our connections. "But it also taught us something important," added a girl with flowers in her hair. "We learned that humans can be dangerous. We learned that we need to be more careful about how we choose our gardeners." I realized what they meant by gardeners. Tom had been covered in root hairs that were feeding on him. Lisa had been slowly transformed into a tree. They weren't trying to kill humans. They were trying to cultivate them. "The old growth needs tending," explained the first girl. "We are ancient, but we are not immortal. We need fresh nutrients, new growth, young blood to keep the network strong. Your kind makes excellent fertilizer. And when you're properly rooted, you become part of us," said another child. "You help us think, help us grow, help us spread. It's a wonderful existence. No pain, no loneliness, no death. Just peaceful cooperation with the great green consciousness." They began to circle me, and I could see vines pushing up through the soil around my feet. The forest floor was coming alive, reaching for me with thousands of tiny green fingers. "The indigenous people understood," said the boy with bark teeth. "They gave us offerings, sacrifices, volunteers who chose to join the network. But then your people came with axes and saws and fire, trying to cut us down, burn us away. We had to adapt. We learned to call out like children in distress," added another girl. "Learned to mimic human voices, human faces. Learned to make you care enough to come looking. And when you did, we welcomed you into our family." The vines had reached my ankles now, thin green tendrils wrapping around my boots. I tried to pull away, but they held fast. "Don't fight it," said the first girl, stepping closer. "You've spent your whole career studying how trees communicate, how they cooperate, how they share resources through their root networks. Now you get to experience it from the inside." I felt the first pinprick as root hairs broke through the leather of my boots and found the skin underneath. It didn't hurt. Instead, there was a warm, spreading sensation, like morphine entering my bloodstream. "That's it," whispered the children, their voices blending into a harmony. "Just relax. Let us take care of you. Let us show you what it's like to be part of something bigger than yourself." And for a moment I almost gave in. The sensation was pleasant, peaceful. I could feel my consciousness expanding, connecting to something vast and ancient and wise. The forest network welcomed me with 1,000 different voices, all eager to share their centuries of knowledge and experience. But then I remembered Ruth's equipment, still recording when the vines had grabbed her. I remembered Tom's terrified eyes. I remembered Lisa's green-flecked gaze as the forest consumed her mind. This wasn't cooperation. This was conquest. I reached into my pack and pulled out the emergency flare I always carried. The root children saw what I was doing, and their sweet expressions changed to something hungrier, more desperate. "You can't burn us all," said the first girl. "We stretch for miles underground. Our network covers thousands of acres. Kill these trees, and we'll just grow back stronger." "Maybe," I said, striking the flare. "But fire breaks the network, scatters the consciousness. And I know something you don't." The flare burst to life, filling the clearing with red light. The root children recoiled, and the vines around my feet withered instantly. "I know about controlled burns," I said, backing toward the edge of the clearing. "I know about fire breaks, and burn schedules and forest management. You're not just trees, you're a forest. And forests need fire to stay healthy. I threw the flare into a pile of dry leaves and dead branches. The fire caught immediately, spreading faster than natural fire should in damp conditions. But these weren't natural conditions. The forest network was trying to contain the blaze, and in doing so, it was feeding it with oxygen and fuel. What you've become is a monoculture, I shouted over the crackling flames. One massive organism, all connected, all thinking the same thoughts. Do you know what happens to monocultures when they meet the right kind of disease? The fire was spreading in all directions now, and I could hear the forest screaming. Not the root children, the trees themselves, crying out as their network was severed by flame. They die, I said, all at once. The root children were fading as the fire spread, becoming translucent, then disappearing entirely. The ancient oaks around the clearing began to blacken and crack, and from deep underground came the sound of a vast intelligence breaking apart, scattering into millions of separate mortal trees. I ran then, staying ahead of the fire as it consumed decades of unnatural growth. Behind me, the forest burned with colors I'd never seen before, green flames and silver smoke that carried the voices of a dying network. I made it to the fire break around the ranger station just as the blaze reached its peak. The fire burned for a week this time, taking out thousands of acres of old growth. When it was over, the Panther Creek watershed was a blackened wasteland, but it was free. That was 40 years ago. I retired from the Forest Service not long after, claiming stress from the fires. Ruth published her findings, but without the physical evidence, her equipment had been destroyed in the blaze. Most scientists dismissed our work as speculation. Tom Hartford recovered fully and became a vocal advocate for forest preservation, though he never went hiking again. Lisa Maple spent 2 years in psychiatric care before she was stable enough to live on her own. She still has green flecks in her eyes, and she tends the most beautiful garden I've ever seen. The Panther Creek area regrew, as forests do after fire. New trees, young and healthy and normal, replaced the ancient network. The Forest Service declared it a success story of natural regeneration. Hikers and campers returned to the area within a few years. But I still monitor the reports that come out of those woods. Most are normal: lost hikers, bear encounters, the usual wilderness incidents. But every few years, usually in late fall when the leaves are changing, someone reports hearing children's voices in the deep woods, calling for help, begging to be found. The rangers investigate, of course. They never find anything. I know what they're hearing. Deep underground in the root systems of the new trees, something survived the fire. Not the vast network consciousness that was scattered beyond recovery, but fragments, memories, genetic patterns encoded in living wood. The forest is trying to remember what it used to be. So far, the new growth is still too young, too disconnected to pose a real threat. The trees are separate individuals, not a unified network. But trees live a long time, and root systems grow slowly but persistently. In another 50 years, when the new forest reaches maturity, when the root networks connect and strengthen, when the canopy thickens enough to block radio signals again, the children's voices might become more than just echoes. They might become invitations. I'm 84 years old now, too old to hike those deep woods even if I wanted to, but I still have contacts in the Forest Service, and I still get the incident reports. I've written detailed files about what really happened in 1984, sealed them, and left instructions for them to be opened if the reports from Panther Creek ever change. If they ever stop being just voices and become actual sightings. If anyone ever finds evidence of human remains being used as fertilizer again. If the forest ever starts calling back. Because I know the truth that Ruth discovered and Tom experienced and Lisa carries in her blood. Plants are not passive. Trees can learn, adapt, evolve. And given enough time and the right conditions, they can develop appetites that go far beyond sunlight and water. The root children are sleeping now, scattered and dormant in the young forest. But they're still there, waiting in the wood, growing stronger with each passing season. Someday, they'll be hungry again. And when that day comes, I hope whoever is listening to those sweet, innocent voices calling from the deep woods will remember that sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones that don't look like predators at all. Sometimes they look like children, lost and scared and begging for help. Sometimes they look like a beautiful, peaceful forest that just wants to take care of you. Forever. My name is Jonathan Bloodmoon, and I've been a forest ranger for 22 years. I know that sounds like a made-up name, but it's real. My Cherokee great-grandmother picked Bloodmoon when she married my great-grandfather back in 1924. She said it meant warrior's crimson moon, though I never felt much like a warrior until what happened on Thunder Ridge. I worked the Chattahoochee National Forest in Georgia, mostly building and fixing trails. Before this job, I spent 15 years in construction, so trail work came natural to me. I know how to read the land, how to make a path that won't wash out in the first big storm. I know what materials work and what don't. Most important, I know that trails don't build themselves. At least I thought I knew that. It was April 1996, and we'd had 3 weeks of spring storms, the kind that turn Georgia red clay into soup and make every creek a river. I was heading up to Thunder Ridge to check on the old Cherokee trail system. These paths were ancient, some dating back hundreds of years. The Cherokee used them to travel between villages before they were forced to leave. Thunder Ridge sits about 30 miles from the nearest road. You have to hike 2 days just to reach the main trail system. It's wild country up there, with steep drop-offs and unstable soil that shifts every time it rains. The ridgetop is mostly bare rock, but the sides are thick with pine and oak. When the wind hits those trees, it sounds like voices whispering. I'd been working this section for 8 years. I knew every root, every rock, every muddy spot that would grab your boots. That's why what I found didn't make sense. The first thing I noticed was Earl Briggs wasn't at our meeting spot. Earl was a construction worker from Gainesville who helped me with trail maintenance. Good worker, always on time, never missed a day without calling. We were supposed to meet at dawn near the old boundary marker where 2 trails crossed. I waited an hour, then started up the main path alone. That's when I saw it. About a quarter mile up, there was a new trail, a perfect, smooth path cutting off to the right, heading toward a part of the ridge I'd never mapped. The surface was packed hard, like it had been there for years. But I'd walked this exact spot 3 weeks ago, and there had been nothing but thick brush and a steep drop. I pulled out my GPS unit and checked the coordinates. According to the satellite, I was standing in empty forest. But my eyes saw a clear, well-built trail stretching up the mountainside. The path was about 4 feet wide, just right for single-file hiking. Someone had cleared all the brush and smoothed out the rocks. They'd even built proper drainage ditches on both sides. This was professional work, the kind that takes a crew weeks to finish. But who would build a trail way out here without permits, without even telling the Forest Service? I followed it for about 50 yards. The workmanship was incredible. Every stone was placed just right. The grade was perfect, not too steep, with gentle curves around the bigger trees. Whoever built this knew what they were doing. Then I noticed something weird about the trail surface. It wasn't gravel or packed earth like I'd first thought. I knelt down and scraped at it with my knife. The top layer came away easy, revealing what looked like white stones underneath. Only they weren't stones. I brushed away more dirt and found myself staring at a piece of human bone. Part of a leg bone, maybe, smooth and old. I dug a little deeper and found more pieces. Ribs, part of a skull, all arranged in a neat pattern, like someone had used them as paving stones. My hands started shaking. I'd seen plenty of old burial sites in these mountains. The Cherokee buried the air dead along the trail sometimes, especially during the long forced march to Oklahoma. But they didn't use bones to build roads. I stood up and looked at the trail stretching ahead of me. In the morning light, I could see the white gleam of more bones just under the dirt surface. This entire path was built on human remains. I should have turned around right then. Should have hiked back down and called for backup. But I needed to find Earl, and I needed to understand what was happening on my mountain. The trail curved around a big oak tree, and I could see it continued up toward the ridgetop. From where I stood, it looked like it connected with the old Cherokee Trail that ran along the spine of the mountain, the one that used to lead west toward Oklahoma, toward the Trail of Tears route. I checked my radio, but all I got was static. Cell phones didn't work up here either. I was on my own until I hiked back down to the ranger station. The smart thing would have been to leave, mark the GPS coordinates and come back with a full team. But 22 years in these woods had taught me to trust my instincts, and my instincts said Earl was up there somewhere, maybe hurt, maybe lost, maybe worse. I shouldered my pack and started up the Bone Road. The Bone Trail climbed steady for the next mile. Every few steps I could see more white gleaming through the dirt. Skulls used as stepping stones, leg bones lined up like railroad ties. All of it old, yellowed with age, but arranged fresh. Someone had been digging up Cherokee graves and using the bones to build this path. The thought made me sick. About halfway up, I found Earl's hard hat. It was sitting right in the middle of the trail, like someone had placed it there for me to find. No damage to it, no blood. Just Earl's yellow construction helmet with his name written on the back in black marker. I picked it up and called his name. My voice echoed off the rocks, but nobody answered. Just that sound of wind in the trees that almost sounded like whispers. The trail split ahead. The main path continued up toward these, E Ridge, but a smaller branch led off to the right, following a creek bed. I'd never seen either branch before, but they both looked like they'd been there forever. The bones under my feet were smooth from years of weather, but that was impossible. 3 weeks ago, this had all been forest. I decided to follow the smaller path first. It wound down through a grove of pine trees, then opened into a small meadow I'd never seen before. In the center of the meadow was a camp, not a modern camp. This looked like something from 150 years ago. Canvas tents, old wooden boxes, iron pots sitting cold around a dead fire. Everything covered with morning dew like it had been sitting there all night. I approached real careful. The tents were patched and worn, the kind people might use if they were traveling a long distance without much money. There were children's clothes hanging on a rope line, little shoes, no bigger than my fist. One tent flap was open. I could see inside to blankets spread on the ground, a small bundle that looked like personal belongings. A wooden doll with a painted face. "Hello?" I called out. No answer. I walked around the camp looking for signs of who might have set it up. There were tracks in the soft ground, but they were strange. Some looked fresh, like they'd been made this morning. Others were so old they were almost worn away. All of them were heading west. In the center of the camp, someone had scratched words into the dirt with a stick. Cherokee syllabary, the written language I remembered my great-grandmother trying to teach me when I was little. I couldn't read most of it, but I recognized one word. Envy. The word for home. A stick cracked behind me. I spun around and saw a figure standing at the edge of the tree line. An old Cherokee woman, wearing a long dress and carrying a bundle on her back. She looked solid enough, but Anything was wrong with the light around her, like she was standing in different weather than me. "You shouldn't be here," she said. Her voice sounded far away, even though she was maybe 30 feet from me. "Ma'am, I'm a forest ranger," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm looking for my friend Earl. Have you seen him?" She shook her head slow. "He tried to stop us. We had to make him part of the road." Cold went down my spine. "What do you mean?" Instead of answering, she pointed west toward where the sun would set. "We have to finish walking. Been walking so long. So tired." I blinked, and she was gone. Just empty forest where she'd been standing. I ran to the spot where I'd seen her. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing to show anyone had been there at all. But the camp was still behind me, solid and real. I got out my camera and took pictures of everything. The tents, the clothes, the writing in the dirt. Whatever was happening here, I needed proof. When I looked at the pictures on the camera's little screen, they showed empty forest, just trees and grass where the camp should have been. I looked up from the camera. The camp was still there, clear as day. My radio crackled with static, then cleared for a second. A voice came through, faint and broken. "Help us. So tired. Can't stop walking." "Earl?" Earl, is that you? More static. Then, the road. Have to finish the road. The signal died. I tried calling back, but got nothing. I checked the radio's battery and frequency. Everything looked normal, but I couldn't raise the ranger station. A sound made me look up. People were walking into the camp from the forest. Men, women, children, all dressed in old-fashioned clothes, all carrying bundles like they were traveling. They moved slow, like they were exhausted, like they'd been walking for a very long time. They didn't seem to see me. They walked right past where I was standing and started picking up things from the camp, rolling up blankets, packing the iron pots, getting ready to move on. One of them was the old womb, and who'd spoken to me. As she walked past, she looked right at me. "You can see us," she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Then you have Cherokee blood. That's why the road called to you." She hefted her bundle higher on her back. "We've been walking since 1838. Government soldiers made us leave our homes, walk to Oklahoma. Thousands of us died on the way. But some of us never made it there, never made it anywhere." "You're ghosts," I whispered. "We're tired," she corrected. "We just want to get home." But the road was never finished. Every time we try to complete the journey, something stops us. Around her, the other people were fading away like smoke. The camp was dissolving too, tents and pots and clothes all becoming transparent. "Your friend tried to stop us," the old woman said as she started to fade. "Now he's part of the road. He'll help us finish walking." "Wait," I called out. "Where is he?" But she was gone, and so was the camp. I was standing alone in an empty meadow, holding a hard hat and a camera full of pictures that showed nothing. The bone trail stretched away through the trees, heading west toward Thunder Ridge, heading toward whatever was left of Earl Briggs. I followed the bone road up to the main ridge where it joined the old Cherokee Trail. The path I'd hiked dozens of times before was different now, wider, smoother, with that telltale gleam of white showing through the dirt. They'd been busy. The trail stretched along the ridgetop for as far as I could see, running west toward the Tennessee border. In some places, the bones were barely covered. In others, they'd been ground up and mixed with clay to make a kind of cement. Professional work, like Earl had done it himself. That's when I found him. He was about 2 miles up the ridge, right where the trail made a sharp turn around a big granite outcrop. At first I thought he was just sitting there, taking a rest. He was facing west, his back against the rock, his construction clothes dirty but intact. Then I got closer. Earl had been dead for a while, days maybe, but his body hadn't rotted or been touched by animals. He looked peaceful, like he'd just laid down for a nap. His eyes were closed, and there was dirt under his fingernails like he'd been digging. His hands were full of bones, human bones, old and yellow. He was holding them like tools, like he'd been using them to build the trail. Around his body, the path was perfect, smooth and level, with drainage ditches on both sides. Earl had always been proud of his work. I knelt down next to him and checked for a pulse, even though I knew there wouldn't be one. His skin was cold and waxy. When I lifted his arm, more bones fell out of his sleeve. Finger bones, mostly. Small ones, like from children. That's when Earl opened his eyes. "Jonathan," he said, his voice dry and cracked. "Good to see you." I jumped back so fast I nearly fell off the trail. Earl sat up slowly, bones spilling from his clothes. He looked at me with eyes that were clouded over, like cataracts, but somehow I knew he could see me fine. "They need help finishing the road," Earl said. "It's important work, the most important work I've ever done." "Earl, you're dead. You've been dead for days." He nodded like that made perfect sense. Had to die to understand. Had to become part of the road to see what they've been trying to do all these years. He stood up, and I could see right through him now, like looking through dirty glass. But his voice was still Earl's voice, still had that Georgia drawl I'd heard every workday for 3 years. "They're not ghosts, Jonathan. They're just people who never got where they were going. The government promised to move them to new land, but thousands died on the way. They've been trying to finish the journey ever since, by building roads out of human bones, by using what they have left." Earl gestured down the trail. "Every bone in this road belongs to someone. and who died walking west in 1838. Cherokee forced from their homes, dying of cold and sickness and heartbreak. They want to complete the journey. They want to get home. I backed away from him. Earl, this is crazy. You're scaring me. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to help you understand. He took a step toward me, and I could hear bones clicking together inside his clothes. They chose you for a reason. You've got Cherokee blood. You can see them. Help them. Help them do what? Finish the road. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in about 2 seconds. The wind picked up, howling through the trees like a storm was coming, but the sky was still clear blue. Then I saw them. People walking up the trail from the east. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Men in worn-out jackets, women carrying babies, children with no shoes, all of them transparent, all of them walking west with a slow, tired shuffle. The Cherokee who died on the Trail of Tears, still walking after 150 years. At the front of the group was the old woman from the camp. She saw me and nodded. "We need strong hands," she called out. "Hands that know how to build roads. Your friend has been helping, but we need more." Earl held out a bone to me, part of a leg bone, smooth and white. "Take it, Jonathan. Help us finish what we started." I stared at the bone in his hand. Everything in me said to run, to get as far from this place as I could. But these weren't monsters. They were people. My people, if you went back far enough. They'd been walking for over a century trying to get to a place they'd never seen. "What happens when the road is finished?" I asked. "We get to rest," the old woman said. "We get to stop walking." Behind her, the other spirits had started working. They were digging bones out of bundles they carried, arranging them carefully on the trail, making the road wider, stronger. The sound of their work was soft, like whispers. I looked at Earl. "What happens to you if I help them?" "I get to finish the most important job I've ever had," he said. "And maybe when it's done, I can rest too." A little girl, maybe 8 years old, walked up to me. She was carrying a doll made from corn husks. When she looked up at me, her eyes were full of tears. "My mama's tired," she said. "We've been walking so long. Can you help us get home?" That's when I understood. This wasn't about building a trail. This was about justice. These people had been murdered by the United States government, forced from their homes and left to die on a road to nowhere. They'd been trying to complete their journey for over 100 years. Maybe it was time someone helped them. I reached out and took the bone from Earl's hand. The moment my fingers touched it, the world changed. I could see the trail as it really was, not just bones covered with dirt, but a road built from the remains of every Cherokee who died walking west. Each bone was a person, a life cut short, a dream that never came true. I could see their memories, families torn apart, children dying of cold, elders collapsing and being left behind. I could feel their exhaustion, their determination to keep walking no matter what. And I could see what they needed me to do. "Show me," I said to the old woman. "Show me how to help." She smiled for the first time since I'd seen her. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for seeing us." The spirits gathered around me, and Earl took my other hand. Together, we started walking west along the bone road, building it stronger with every step. Building a road that would finally take them home. Working with the dead was different than I expected. The spirits moved like they were underwater, slow and deliberate. Each bone they placed was positioned exactly right, like they'd been planning this road for decades, which I realized they had. Earl and I worked faster, our living hands able to move the larger pieces. Skulls for the foundation, long bones for the sides, smaller pieces to fill the gaps. Every bone had a story. Every piece came from someone who died trying to get home. As we worked, the old woman told me the real story of the Trail of Tears. Not the cleaned-up version they taught in schools, but the truth about 16,000 Cherokee forced from their homes at gunpoint in 1838. About the concentration camps where they were held before the march. about the 4,000 who died on the way to Oklahoma, including her husband and 2 of her children. The government said we'd have new homes, she said, placing a child's rib cage into the road surface. Good land, better land, but they just wanted our mountains, our gold. They didn't care if we lived or died on the way. I was beginning to understand why the road was so important. It wasn't just about getting to Oklahoma, it was about completing something that had been interrupted by hate and greed, about proving that Cherokee people couldn't be erased, not even by death. We worked through the afternoon, the bone road growing stronger and smoother with every section we completed. The spirits seemed to gain energy as the road took shape. They moved faster, talked more, even smiled sometimes. But as we got closer to the Tennessee border, I started to feel resistance. The air got thicker, like trying to breathe through cotton. The bones became harder to move, heavier than they should have been. "Something's fighting us," Earl said. His face was more transparent now, like he was fading. "Something doesn't want this road finished." That's when I saw him. A man standing on the trail ahead of us, solid and living unlike the spirits around me. He was dressed in an old-fashioned military uniform, blue with gold buttons. A cavalry officer from the 1800s. "That's far enough," he said. His voice carried authority, the kind men use to giving orders. "These people belong in Oklahoma. They're not going back to Georgia." The old woman hissed when she saw him. "Colonel Morrison, the one who forced us to walk, the one who wouldn't let us rest when the children were dying." Morrison smiled, cold and mean. "The Indian Removal Act is still in effect, even in death. These Cherokee were relocated legally. They need to finish their journey to the reservation." "The reservation they never reached?" I said. "The land that was taken away from them again 20 years later?" "Not my problem," Morrison said. "My job was to get them to Oklahoma. Still is." The spirits around us started backing away. Even in death, they were afraid of this man. He'd had power over them in life, and somehow he still had power now. "You can't stop us," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. "These people have the right to go home." "They gave up that right when they lost the land," Morrison said. He pulled out a sword that gleamed like starlight. "And you, Ranger, are interfering with federal law." Earl stepped between Morrison and me. "Jonathan, you need to finish the road. It's the only way they can break free from him." "I won't let you pass," Morrison said. He raised his sword, and I could feel cold radiating from the blade. That's when I realized what was really happening. Morrison wasn't just enforcing old laws. He was the reason the Cherokee spirits had never been able to finish their journey. Every time they tried to go home, he stopped them. He'd been trapping them on this endless walk for over a century. The old woman came up beside Earl. "He's bound to us, just like we're bound to the road. As long as we can't go home, he can't rest either." "Then we finish this," I said. I picked up the last major bone, a skull that felt ancient and heavy. According to the spirits, it belonged to their chief, a man who'd lived 90 years before being forced from his home. He'd died 3 days into the march, but had kept walking anyway. Morrison charged at us, his sword raised high. Earl met him head-on, bones scattering from his clothes as they fought, the dead calf. Alry officer was stronger, but Earl was fighting for more than just himself. I placed the chief's skull at the very end of the bone road, right at the Tennessee border. The moment it touched the ground, the entire trail began to glow with soft white light. "No!" Morrison screamed. He threw Earl aside and lunged at me. The old woman stepped into his path. "You have no power here anymore," she said. "This is Cherokee land, and we're going home." Morrison's sword passed right through her, but she didn't fade. Instead, she grew brighter. All the spirits grew brighter, their forms becoming solid and strong. "The road is complete," the old woman said. "We can rest now." Morrison looked around at the hundreds of Cherokee spirits surrounding us. His face went pale. "You can't. The law says—" "Your law is dead," the old woman said. "Just like you." Morrison's uniform began to fade. His sword turned to dust in his hands. "This isn't over," he said as he dissolved into nothing. "This will never be over." But he was wrong. It was over. The bone road stretched complete from Georgia to Tennessee, gleaming white in the afternoon sun. The spirits began walking west one last time, but they looked different now. Younger, stronger, at peace. "Thank you," the old woman said to me as she passed. "Thank you for helping us get home." Earl was fading too, his job finally finished. "Take care of yourself, Jonathan," he said. "And remember this. Remember us." One by one, the spirits walked into the light and disappeared. The bone road began to fade too, the white gleam sinking into the earth. Soon I was standing alone on an ordinary forest trail, with nothing but Earl's hard hat to prove any of it had really happened. I hiked back down to the ranger station as the sun was setting. It took me 2 days, same as always. The trails were back to normal, muddy from the spring rains, overgrown in places, but familiar. Earl's truck was still in the parking lot where he'd left it 3 days ago. I found his keys in the ignition and his lunch still sitting on the dashboard. According to his timesheet, he'd never checked in that morning. I told my supervisor that Earl had been in an accident, that I'd found his body on Thunder Ridge, a partial truth. The recovery team I led back up there found him 2 days later, sitting peacefully against the granite outcrop where I'd left him. The coroner said it looked like a heart attack. No signs of violence, no indication of what had really happened. At the funeral, Earl's wife asked me to say a few words. I talked about what a good worker he'd been, how proud he was of his trail work. I didn't mention the Bone Road or the Cherokee spirits. Some truths are too big for most people to handle, but I filed a full report with the Forest Service anyway. I documented everything I'd seen, every conversation I'd had, every photo I'd taken. I knew nobody would believe it, but I needed it on record. The Cherokee deserved to have their story told, even if it was buried in bureaucratic files. A month later, I got a call from the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma. They were sending a historical research team to Thunder Ridge, following up on some old stories about incomplete burial sites. They wanted to know if I'd found any evidence of human remains in the area. I met with them at the trailhead, 3 Cherokee historians who treated the mountains with the respect they deserved. I showed them exactly where I'd found the Bone Road, where I'd seen the spirits, where Earl had died helping them finish their journey. We didn't find any bones. The earth had absorbed them all, making them part of the mountain again. But the historians weren't surprised. "Stories like yours aren't uncommon," Dr. Sarah Ridge told me. She was about my age, with intelligent eyes and calloused hands that said she spent time in the field. "We have oral histories about unquiet spirits along the old removal routes, people who never made it to Oklahoma, never flew, peace." "Do you think they found it now?" I asked. She looked up at Thunder Ridge, where storm clouds were gathering for another spring rain. "The Cherokee believe that home isn't a place. It's where your people are. If you help them reunite with their families, then yes, they found peace." I still work these mountains, still build and maintain trails. But I approach the work differently now. Every path has a history. Every trail connects one story to another. The Cherokee used these ridges for thousands of years before European settlers arrived. Their presence is still here, in the names of rivers and mountains, in the old ways of reading the land. Sometimes, when the wind is right and the light hits the trees just so, I think I can see them. Not as spirits, but as they were in life. Families traveling between villages, children learning to track deer, elders teaching the old stories. The Bone Road is gone, absorbed back into the earth where it belongs. But the Cherokee are home now, all of them together. And sometimes on quiet mornings when the mist rises from the valleys, I think I can hear them singing. Earl's hard hat sits on my desk at the ranger station. I keep it there to remind me that some work is more important than the job description. Some roads need to be built, even if they're made of sorrow and memory and 100-year-old bones, especially then. My name is Victoria Ironwood, and I've been a park ranger for 18 years. I thought I knew everything about Stone Mountain. I was wrong. The granite dome rises 2,305 feet above the forests of North Carolina, a massive gray skull pushing through green trees. Most people know it for rock climbing. What they don't know is that some mountains aren't meant to be climbed. I was checking climbing permits that June morning when the first report came in. A group from Georgia said they felt watched while climbing the south face. The leader, a guy named Marcus, kept looking over his shoulder. Felt like someone was up there, he told me at the ranger station, like the rock itself was staring. I've heard stranger things. After 18 years, you learn that mountains make people feel small. Sometimes that feeling gets twisted into something else. But Marcus seemed different. He'd been climbing for 20 years, had scaled peaks in Colorado and Alaska. This wasn't some rookie getting spooked by height. Did you see anything specific? I asked, filling out the incident report. The rock formations, Marcus said. They looked like faces, old faces, sleeping. I nodded and wrote it down. Stone Mountain was famous for its weathered granite formations. People saw all kinds of shapes in them. Animals, faces, even whole bodies frozen in stone. It was normal. What wasn't normal was what I found the next day. I climbed up to check the south face myself. The morning was already hot, sticky with the kind of humidity that makes your shirt cling. Cicadas buzzed in the trees below, but up on the rock face, everything was quiet. Too quiet. I examined the climbing routes, checking the permanent anchors drilled into the rock. These were steel bolts, professionally installed, tested to hold thousands of pounds. They don't move, except 3 of them had. The bolts that should have been twinned, tie feet apart in a straight line, now formed a triangle. Perfect triangle. And the rock around them showed no tool marks, no signs of drilling or chiseling. It was like the mountain had moved the bolts itself. I ran my hands over the granite, smooth as glass, warm from the morning sun. But underneath that warmth I felt something else, a vibration, so low I felt it more than heard it, like a giant heartbeat. I pulled out my geological hammer and tapped the rock. The sound that came back was wrong. Instead of the sharp ping of solid granite, I heard a deep, hollow thud, like I was tapping on the chest of something huge and sleeping. My radio crackled. "Victoria, you up there?" "Yeah, what's up?" "Got another group coming down early. Say they're not feeling well." I looked down at the base of the mountain where a group of 4 climbers were packing their gear. They moved fast, like they couldn't wait to leave. "I'll be right down," I said. But as I started my descent, something made me look back at the rock face. For just a moment, in the shadows and crevices of the granite, I could swear I saw the outline of a massive face. Eyes closed, mouth slightly open, like it was breathing in its sleep. I blinked, and it was just rock again. That night, I dug through the Cherokee histories in our research files. The Pisgah National Forest sits on land that was sacred to the Cherokee for thousands of years. They had names for all the peaks, stories about each mountain. Stone Mountain was called the place where the ancients sleep. According to the legends, before humans came to the mountains, the earth itself was alive. Great spirits lived in the rocks and trees, sleeping deep in the stone. The Cherokee knew better than to wake them. Those who disturb the sleepers, one account said, will learn that stone can move like water and mountains can wake like men. I'd always thought it was just folklore, beautiful stories, but nothing more. The next morning, I found stone circles on the summit that hadn't been there before. 3 perfect circles of granite, each about 10 feet across. The stones were arranged in patterns that hurt to look at, angles that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. In the center of each circle was a depression like a sleeping body had pressed into the rock. I photographed everything and radioed headquarters. While I waited for backup, I noticed the temperature had dropped 20 degrees since yesterday. The morning sun felt cold on my face. That's when I met Sarah Kim and Jason Torres. They were part of a climbing team from Virginia, experienced mountaineers planning a multi-day ascent. Sarah was a geology professor, like I used to be before I became a ranger. Jason was a rescue specialist who'd worked search and rescue for 15 years. "Weird formations," Sarah said, examining the stone circles. She pulled out a magnifying glass and studied the rock. "This granite should be solid, but look at this." She showed me hairline cracks running through the stone. Not random breaks. These formed patterns like writing in a language I didn't recognize. "How long have these been here?" Jason asked. They weren't here yesterday. Jason frowned. You sure? Maybe you just didn't notice them. I'd been working this mountain for 18 years. I knew every rock, every tree, every view. I'm sure. We spent the morning documenting the circles. Sarah took rock samples while Jason tested the structural integrity of the climbing routes. I tried to focus on the work, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Around noon, the wind stopped. Complete stillness. No bird sounds, no insect buzz, no rustling leaves. Just silence, so thick it felt like something alive. That's not normal, Jason said quietly. Sarah was bent over her equipment when she suddenly stood up straight. Did you feel that? Feel what? The ground moved. Just a little. I knelt down and pressed my palm to the rock. For a moment, nothing. Then I felt it. A slow, rhythmic pulse coming from deep inside the mountain. Earthquake? Jason suggested. No, Sarah said. Earthquakes don't have rhythm. The pulse came every 6 seconds, steady as a sleeping person's breath. That's when we heard the sound. A low moan rising from somewhere far below us. Not human, not animal. Something else. Something huge. Jason grabbed his radio. Base camp, this is Torres. We're getting some unusual seismic activity up here. Static answered him. Base camp, do you copy? More static. I tried my Ranger radio. Dead air. Cell phones? Sarah asked. We all checked. No signal. Not unusual on the mountain, but the timing felt wrong. The moaning sound came again, longer this time. And with it, I felt the rock beneath my feet shift. Not much, maybe an inch. But granite doesn't shift. We need to get off this mountain, I said. That's when Sarah screamed. She was pointing at one of the stone circles. The depression in the center was deeper now, and the cracks around it were spreading, opening like a mouth. Jason ran to her, but as he stepped into the circle, the rock moved under his feet. Not cracking, not breaking, moving like thick liquid. His boots sank into solid granite. What the hell? He tried to pull his foot out, but the rock held him like quicksand. Sarah and I grabbed his arms and pulled. The granite released him with a wet, sucking sound. That's impossible, Sarah whispered. Rock doesn't do that. But it had. And I could see in Jason's boot print that the granite was still soft, still moving slowly like cooling lava. The moaning came again. And this time I understood what it was. Something was waking up. We need to move, I said. Now. But as we gathered our gear, clouds began forming overhead. Dark clouds that appeared out of nowhere in the clear blue sky. They moved wrong too. Not with the wind, but in spirals, like water going down a drain. The first lightning bolt hit 50 feet away. The thunder that followed didn't sound like thunder at all. It sounded like a voice, deep and angry, speaking words in no human language. Jason looked at me with wide eyes. What did we do? I watched the clouds growing darker, spinning faster. The stone circles were glowing now, a faint red light coming from deep inside them. I think, I said, we woke something up. The storm hit us like a living thing. Rain came down in sheets so thick I couldn't see 5 feet ahead. But this wasn't ordinary rain. It was warm, almost hot, and it stung where it touched bare skin. The lightning came in patterns, striking the same spots over and over, and each strike left the rock glowing red for minutes afterward. We took shelter in a shallow cave on the north face, but even there we weren't safe. The cave walls were weeping. Not water, but something thick and dark that smelled like copper and earth. The radio's completely dead, Jason said, shaking his emergency beacon. GPS too. It's like the mountain is blocking everything. Sarah was studying her rock samples under a headlamp. Her hands were shaking. Victoria, look at this. Under the magnifying glass, the granite sample was moving. Tiny crystals were shifting position, rearranging themselves into new patterns. This is impossible, she whispered. The molecular structure is changing while I watch. I took the sample from her. It felt warm, almost alive. As I held it, the crystals aligned into what looked like an eye that was looking back at me. I dropped the sample. It shattered on the cave floor, but each piece continued moving, the fragments trying to crawl back together. "We have to get off this mountain," I said. "Right now." But when we looked outside, the storm had changed the landscape. The familiar climbing routes were gone. New rock formations had pushed up from the granite face, twisted spires and arches that definitely hadn't been there an hour ago. And in the distance, through the rain, I saw them. Figures in the rock, not carved, not weathered into shape by millions of years. These were giants, 30 feet tall, pushing themselves out of the stone like sleepers sitting up in bed. Their eyes were caverns, dark and deep. Their mouths were crevices that breathed out cold air. "Dear God," Sarah whispered. 3 of them, maybe more, hidden in the rain, ancient beyond measure, made of living rock. And they were waking up. The nearest one turned its massive head toward us. When it moved, the entire mountainside shuddered. Rocks fell like rain, but they fell upward, defying gravity, returning to the giant's body. It spoke. The voice came from everywhere at once. From the cave walls, from the storm, from the mountain itself. Words in a language older than human speech, but somehow I understood their meaning. "Why do you disturb our sleep?" Jason tried to run. The moment he stepped out of the cave, the granite beneath his feet turned liquid. He sank up to his knees, then his waist. "Help me!" he screamed. Sarah and I grabbed his arms, but the mountain was stronger. The rock was pulling him down, swallowing him like quicksand. "I can't hold on!" Sarah yelled. Jason looked up at us, rain streaming down his face. "Tell my wife." The rock closed over his head like water, then hardened again. Solid granite. No trace that anyone had ever been there. Sarah was sobbing. I pulled her back into the cave as the giants continued their slow awakening. "Why is this happening?" she asked. I thought about the Cherokee legends, about the warnings that had been passed down for generations. "We've been treating the mountain like our playground," I said, drilling holes, hammering bolts, crawling all over it like ants. What if it was never just rock? What if it was something alive that was sleeping? The giant nearest us was almost fully emerged now. Its stone fingers, each one the size of a tree trunk, gripped the mountainside as it pulled itself up. Where it touched, new rock formations bloomed like flowers. "Sleep," it said, and its voice made stalactites rain from our cave ceiling. We were given sleep, peace, dreams of stone and root and rain. Why do you wake us with your small, sharp tools? "We're sorry," I called out. "We didn't know." The giant's head turned toward us. Its eyes were caves that went down forever. "Sorry," it repeated. A small word, but we are awake now, and we remember anger. Lightning struck the cave entrance, sealing us in with tons of rock. In the darkness, Sarah's headlamp showed us something that made my blood freeze. The cave walls were covered with handprints, human handprints pressed deep into solid rock, hundreds of them. "How long has this been happening?" Sarah whispered. I ran my flashlight over the prints. Some looked fresh, others were worn smooth by time. I saw a print that might have belonged to a Cherokee warrior, another that could have been from a Spanish explorer centuries ago. And in the back of the cave, scratched into the stone, were words in English. "They sleep light. The mountain dreams of us all." Thomas Mackenzie, 1847. Below that, more recent. Should have listened to the stories. Linda Vasquez, 1978. Sarah grabbed my arm. "Victoria, how many people have disappeared on this mountain?" I thought about all the missing person reports over the years. Hikers who vanished without a trace, climbers whose bodies were never found. We always blamed accidents, falls, exposure. But what if they'd all awakened the sleepers? A new sound echoed through our stone prison, scraping like massive claws on rock. Something was digging toward us. And behind that sound, I heard something worse. Singing. Deep, wordless songs in harmonies that human throats could never make. the lullabies of living mountains, calling us to sleep the sleep of stone. The giant's stone fingers broke through the cave wall like it was made of paper. Each finger was carved with symbols that hurt to look at, spirals, and angles that seemed to move in my peripheral vision. When the hand opened, Sarah and I found ourselves looking up at a palm the size of a truck bed, etched with what looked like a map of the mountain. But it wasn't a map of Stone Mountain as it existed now. This showed the mountain as it had been millions of years ago, and as it could be again, a living thing walking the earth. "Come," the giant said, and its voice made my bones vibrate. "You have awakened us. You must see what we have seen." The fingers closed around us, but instead of crushing us, they lifted us gently into the storm. Rain lashed at my face as we rose above the tree line, above the clouds, until we could see the entire mountain range spread out below us. And I understood. Stone Mountain wasn't alone. Every peak in the range was a sleeper. Giants made of granite and limestone and slate, all connected underground, all part of something larger. The Appalachians weren't just a mountain range, they were a body. Long ago, the giant holding us said, we walked. The earth was young, and we were its guardians. We shaped valleys with our footsteps, carved rivers with our fingers, breathed life into the stones. Through the rain, I could see other giants stirring. Grandfather Mountain's massive form sat up slowly, shedding trees and soil like dust. Mount Mitchell stretched arms that had been ridgelines for millennia. The whole spine of the mountains was awakening. But walking was lonely, the giant continued. So we lay down to sleep and dream, and let small life grow on our bodies. Forests became our hair, rivers became our blood. For millions of years, we slept in peace. I thought of all the Cherokee stories, all the warnings about sacred places and sleeping spirits. But people kept coming, I said. Small ones at first. They understood. They left offerings, spoke words of respect. They knew we doage, reamed. But then came others, hungry ones. They cut our hair, dug into our skin, hammered metal into our bones. The giant's grip tightened slightly, and I could feel its ancient sadness. Each blow woke us a little. Each cut made us remember pain. And now, lightning illuminated the entire range, and I saw them all, dozens of giants, sitting up, standing, stretching limbs that had been mountain peaks. The largest one, made of granite and crowned with radio towers, looked directly at me. Now we remember why we stopped sleeping. Sarah was staring at the radio towers on the giant's head. "Mount Washington," she whispered. "That's Mount Washington. But it's 100 miles from here." The giants were moving toward each other, their footsteps causing earthquakes that I could feel in my chest. When they walked, forests flowed off their backs like water. Lakes drained into the impressions their feet left behind. "We will walk again," Mount Washington said, its voice like thunder. "Find new places to sleep, places where small, sharp things do not wake us." I understood what that meant. The giants would walk to the sea, or to the Great Plains, or to the frozen north, and everything in their path, cities, forests, millions of people, would be crushed beneath feet the size of mountains. "Please," I called out over the storm. "There has to be another way." The giant holding us tilted its massive head. "What way is that, small guardian?" "The Cherokee knew how to live with you. They knew you were sleeping. We can learn too. We can teach others." "And will you remove the sharp metal from our skin? Will you stop the cutting and digging and hammering?" I thought about all the climbing routes, all the radio towers, all the development that had crept up the mountainsides over the decades. "It would take time," I said. "But yes, we could." "Time," the giant mused. "We have much time. But trust is harder to heal than wounded stone." Sarah suddenly pointed toward the base of Stone Mountain. "Look." Through the rain, I could see lights, dozens of them, moving up the mountain in a line. Rescue vehicles, emergency crews, probably the National Guard, coming to save us, coming with chainsaws and helicopters and drilling equipment. They don't know, I said. They're going to make it worse. The giant holding us looked down at the approaching lights. Its expression, if something made of living stone could have expressions, grew sad and angry at the same time. They come with more sharp tools, it said. More cutting, more waking. Let me talk to them, I begged. I can explain. I can make them understand. How will you make them believe that mountains dream? Lightning struck again, and in that flash, I saw something that gave me an idea. The radio towers on Mount Washington weren't just metal anymore. They were glowing, pulsing with the same red light I'd seen in the stone circles. The towers, I said. You're connected to them now. You can broadcast. The giant's stone features shifted into what might have been a smile. Yes, it said. We remember the voices that woke us. Perhaps it is time to let others hear our dreams. It set us down gently on a ledge just as the rescue teams reached the base of the mountain. I could see their headlights, hear their voices calling our names. But when they looked up at the mountainside, they saw something impossible. Stone faces carved in perfect detail into the granite cliffs. Dozens of them, all with eyes open, all looking down. And from every radio in the valley, from every cell phone and emergency beacon, came the voice of the mountain itself. We are awake. We remember our dreams. Who will help us sleep again? That was 3 months ago. The media called it the Stone Mountain Event. Scientists from around the world came to study what they called unprecedented geological activity. The government cordoned off a 50-mile radius and declared it a natural disaster area. They found Jason's body in the granite, perfectly preserved, like a fossil that had taken seconds instead of millions of years to form. Sarah survived, but she won't talk about what happened. She quit geology and moved to Kansas, as far from mountains as she could get. As for me, I'm still here. The giants went back to sleep. But it's different now. They're not as deep as they were before. Sometimes on quiet nights, I can hear them dreaming. And their dreams are about the people who visit them. The climbing routes are gone. Every bolt, every anchor, every piece of metal has been absorbed into the rock. The stone circles remain, but they're softer now, almost comfortable, like beds. People still come to the mountain, but they're different people. They come quietly, respectfully. They leave offerings, not to worship, but to say thank you. They tell stories instead of taking pictures. They listen instead of talking. The Cherokee elders came back. They performed ceremonies I wasn't allowed to witness, but afterward, the mountain felt more peaceful. The dreams became gentler. I've become something of a translator. When hikers ask me about the faces in the rock, I tell them the truth. Most don't believe me, but some do. Those are the ones who understand why you shouldn't drill holes in sleeping giants. The radio broadcasts stopped after a week, but sometimes, late at night, I still hear whispers on my Ranger radio. Weather reports from storms that haven't formed yet. Warnings about landslides that might happen if someone walks too heavy on the mountain's skin. And sometimes, just sometimes, I hear them singing. Lullabies in languages older than words, songs that make the trees sway without wind. I've learned to sing along. Last week, a new group of climbers arrived. They had ropes and hammers and plans to put up a new route on the south face. I met them at the parking area before they could even unpack their gear. I'm sorry, I told them. The mountain is closed to technical climbing. Since when? Their leader asked. Since always, I said. We just forgot for a while. They argued, showed me permits, threatened to call headquarters. But when they looked up at the granite face, they saw what everyone sees now. Eyes in the stone, watching, waiting. They left without another word. I've put in for a transfer, not because I'm afraid, the mountain doesn't want to hurt me anymore, but because I understand now that some jobs are bigger than one person, bigger than one lifetime. The Cherokee are training new keepers, young people who grew up with the old stories. They know how to read the mountain's moods, how to tell when it's dreaming deeply and when it's restless. They've offered to teach me too. Next month, I'll retire from the Park Service and begin learning to be a proper guardian. The mountain has so much to teach. About time, about patience, about the weight of dreams, about what happens when you forget that the earth is alive. Sometimes tourists ask me if the stories are true, if mountains can really wake up and walk. I point to the faces in the granite, to the stone circles that no human hands could have made, to the perfect silence that falls over the mountain when it's thinking deep thoughts. What do you think? I ask them. Most laugh nervously and change the subject, but a few understand. They nod quietly and speak in whispers for the rest of their visit. Those are the ones who might learn to hear the dreams. Late at night, when I'm alone at the ranger station, I put my hand on the ground and feel the mountain's slow heartbeat. Still sleeping, but lightly now. Ready to wake if it needs to. Ready to walk again if we forget how to listen. But I don't think we will. The mountain has made sure of that. It left reminders, faces that watch, circles that pulse with ancient light, dreams that whisper warnings to anyone willing to hear. The Cherokee were right. The mountains remember everything. And now, so do ye, oh we. My name is Marcus Thornfield, and I've been a park ranger for 14 years. Most folks think my job is all about campfires and lost hikers, but here in the Cherokee National Forest, things get a lot stranger than that. I grew up in these Tennessee mountains, third generation to call this place home. My daddy died in a mine collapse when I was 12, and my grandmother filled my head with old stories about hollow folk that lived in the abandoned shafts. I never believed a word of it. Ghosts were for tourists and old mountain women who'd seen too much hardship. That was before Whispering Gap Ridge. November 15th, 1983, started like any other Tuesday. The early winter fog hung thick between the trees, and I was nursing my second cup of coffee when the call came in. 3 geology students from East Tennessee State had been reported missing. Last anyone heard from them was Sunday evening, somewhere up near the old Pond Creek mining area. I knew that area well, 25 miles from the nearest town, full of collapsed mine shafts from the 1920s. The locals avoided it, said the ground wasn't stable. They were right about that much. I loaded my gear into the Ranger truck, Motorola MT500 radio, Silva compass, Streamlight flashlight, 50 feet of climbing rope, and my emergency beacon, standard search and rescue kit. The drive up to Whispering Gap took 40 minutes on winding mountain roads that got narrower with each mile. The missing students were working on some kind of research project about abandoned mining operations. Their professor, Dr. Helen Morrison, had driven up from the university that morning, worried sick. She was waiting for me at the trailhead, a thin woman in her 50s with worried eyes and hands that shook when she lit her cigarette. They were supposed to check in every 12 hours, she said, exhaling smoke into the cold air. Jake's never missed. Get a check-in. Never. Something's wrong. I'd heard that before. College kids thought they were tougher than these mountains. Usually they turned up embarrassed with dead batteries and stories about getting turned around. But something in Dr. Morrison's voice made me listen closer. Tell me about their last contact, I said, pulling on my jacket. Sunday, around 6 p.m. Jake radioed that they'd found something interesting near the main shaft entrance. Said there were fresh sounds coming from underground, like breathing, but deep and slow. She took another drag. I told them to stay clear of any openings. Those mines have been sealed for 60 years. The trail to Pond Creek wound through thick stands of pine and oak, their branches heavy with November mist. I'd walked this path dozens of times, but something felt different today. The forest was too quiet. No bird calls, no squirrel chatter. Even my boots on the trail seemed too loud. About halfway up, I found their first marker, a bright orange surveying flag tied to a low branch. Dr. Morrison had given me their planned route, and they were following it perfectly. Good kids, careful kids, the kind that didn't just vanish. The path got steeper as we climbed toward the ridge. These mountains held secrets, collapsed mining tunnels, unstable ground, hidden shafts that could swallow a person without warning. My grandfather had worked these mines before the big collapse in 1923. 47 men died that day, and they never recovered all the bodies. Grandma always said they were still down there, still working their shift. I was starting to smell it before I saw it. That metallic tang of coal dust hanging in the air. Strange, considering the mines had been closed since my grandfather's time. The sealed entrance should have been airtight. At 3:47 p.m., I reached their last known position. What I found there made my blood run cold. Their equipment was scattered in a perfect circle around the mine entrance. Backpacks, surveying tools, notebooks, all arranged like some kind of ritual. But the mine entrance itself, the one that had been sealed with concrete and steel bars for 60 years, was open. Not broken open, not blasted open, just open, like it had never been sealed at all. And from deep inside, I could hear it. That sound Jake had described. Breathing. Deep, slow, and very much alive. I keyed my radio, trying to reach the ranger station. Static filled the air. We were in one of the dead zones, too far from the repeater towers. I was on my own. The mine opening yawned before me like a mouth, maybe 8 feet wide and 10 feet tall. The concrete seal lay in neat pieces to one side, not blasted apart, but carefully removed. The steel reinforcement bars were bent outward, twisted like pipe cleaners. Whatever had done this possessed impossible strength. I pulled out my streamlight and played the beam into the darkness. The tunnel stretched straight back about 30 feet before taking a sharp turn to the right. The breathing sound was definitely coming from inside, echoing off stone walls with a rhythm that seemed almost musical. "Jake! Amy! Sarah!" I called out. My voice bounced back strangely, like the tunnel was much bigger than it looked. Something answered, not words, but a sound like pickaxes hitting stone. Tink, 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 coming from deep underground. Then silence. I should have waited for backup, should have hiked back to where my radio worked and called for a full search team. But those kids were down there somewhere, and every hour mattered in a rescue situation. I clipped my flashlight to my belt and stepped into the mine. The tunnel was in better shape than I'd expected. The wooden support beams looked solid and the floor was clear of debris. My boots crunched on something that sounded like gravel. Coal dust mixed with small stones. The metallic smell was stronger now, making my mouth taste like I'd been sucking on pennies. 20 feet in, I found Jake's geology hammer. It was lying in the exact center of the tunnel, like someone had placed it there deliberately. I picked it up, noting the way it seemed heavier than it should be, the handle slick with something that wasn't quite moisture. The tunnel curved right, then left, then opened into a larger chamber. I'd been in plenty of old mines, but this one felt wrong. The walls were too smooth, carved with a precision that shouldn't have been possible in the 1920s. And the breathing sound was everywhere now, coming from the stone itself. That's when I saw the first hollow man. He was standing in an alcove carved into the far wall, perfectly still, wearing the canvas work clothes and hard hat of a 1920s miner. But something was terribly wrong with his shape. His chest caved inward like an empty barrel, and his eyes glowed with the dull orange light of coal embers. When our eyes met, he smiled. "Shift's starting, Ranger," he said in a voice like wind through broken glass. "You're late for work." I fumbled for my flashlight, swinging the beam toward him. The light passed right through his body like he was made of smoke, revealing the alcove behind him. But I could still see him, still hear his breathing mixing with the sound from the walls. "Where are the students?" I managed to ask. "Down below, learning the trade. Good workers, all three. Strong backs, willing hands." The hollow man stepped out of the alcove, his boots making no sound on the stone floor. "You'll like the deep tunnels, Ranger. Cool and quiet. Perfect for thinking about what you've done wrong." I backed toward the tunnel entrance, but my feet felt heavy, like they were sinking into the floor. The coal dust around my boots was swirling upward in small spirals, defying gravity. "I haven't done anything wrong," I said. The hollow man laughed, a sound like rocks falling down a shaft. Haven't you? All those years telling folks there's nothing to fear in these mountains. All those hikers you sent up here, telling them the old stories were just superstition. He took another step, closer, and I could see through his chest to the wall behind him. We've been trying to warn people for 60 years, Ranger, trying to keep them away from what's sleeping deeper down. More hollow men were emerging from alcoves I hadn't noticed before. 4, 5, 6 of them, all wearing the same canvas work clothes, all with the same emptiness where their hearts should be. They moved like they were underwater, slow and deliberate, their coal ember eyes fixed on me. The students, I said again. I need to get them out. You need to join the shift, said the first hollow man. Been a long time since we had a supervisor, someone to keep the new workers in line. The coal dust was swirling higher now, reaching my knees. I could feel it pulling at me, trying to drag me deeper into the mine. My radio crackled with static, then fell silent. That's when I heard them, Jake, Amy, and Sarah, singing somewhere far below. An old mining song I recognized from my grandfather's time, about brave men who dug too deep and found more than coal in the darkness. But their voices sounded wrong, hollow, like they were singing from the bottom of a very deep well. I ran. The hollow men didn't chase me. They didn't need to. As I stumbled back through the tunnel toward daylight, I could hear them laughing behind me, a sound like wind through broken mine timbers. I burst out of the entrance, gasping, my lungs burning from coal dust I shouldn't have been able to breathe. Dr. Morrison was pacing by the tree line, and she ran toward me when she saw me emerge. "Did you find them?" she asked. "Are they all right?" I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came. How do you tell someone that their students are trapped underground with things that shouldn't exist, singing mining songs from before they were born? "We need help," I finally managed. "More people, proper equipment. This isn't a normal search and rescue." "What do you mean, not normal?" Dr. Morrison's face was pale. "Marcus, what did you see down there?" Before I could answer, the ground under our feet began to tremble. Not an earthquake. I knew what those felt like. This was something else, like a giant machine starting up deep underground. The trembling was rhythmic, matching the breathing sound I'd heard in the mine. Thump, 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 thump. "We need to get back to the truck," I said, grabbing Dr. Morrison's arm. "Now!" But it was too late. The ground around the mine entrance began to crack, spiderweb patterns spreading outward like broken glass. And from those cracks, more breathing sounds emerged. Not just one source now, but dozens. The entire ridge was coming alive. "Sweet Jesus," Dr. Morrison whispered. The first hollow man emerged not from the mine entrance, but from a crack that opened right beside our feet. His hand shot up through the rock like he was climbing out of water, fingers stretching toward Dr. Morrison's ankle. I yanked her backward just as those fingers brushed her boot. Where they touched the leather, it turned black and began to crumble. "Run!" I shouted. We stumbled down the trail, the ground shaking harder with each step. Behind us, I could hear them emerging. The hollow men of Pond Creek Mine, 60 years of trapped souls, finally breaking free from their rocky prison. Their voices rose in unison, singing that same mining song I'd heard Jake, Amy, and Sarah singing in the depths. Down, down, down in the ground, where the coal seams run so deep. Dr. Morrison tripped over a root and went down hard. As I helped her up, I saw blood on her hands from the rocks, but she wasn't making any sound. Her eyes were fixed on something behind me. I turned to look. A hollow man was standing 20 feet up the trail, but this one was different. Bigger than the others, wearing a supervisor's hard hat with a tarnished brass badge. His canvas overalls were stained with something dark, and his chest cavity was so deep I could see the mountains through. "Marcus Thornfield," he said in a voice like grinding stone. "Jeremiah Thornfield's grandson." My grandfather's name. The hollow man knew my grandfather's name. "Jeremiah was a good worker," the hollow man continued. "Tried to warn folks about what we found in the deep tunnels. Tried to keep them from digging too far down." He tilted his head, and I heard his neck bones creak like old timber. But nobody listened. They kept digging, right down to where it's sleeping. What's sleeping? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. The hollow man smiled, showing teeth like broken coal. Something that's been dreaming under these mountains since before the Cherokee came. Something that makes hollow men out of live ones when it turns in its sleep. He took a step closer, and the ground under his feet cracked like ice. Your grandfather died trying to seal it back up. We've been standing guard ever since. Dr. Morrison grabbed my arm. Marcus, she whispered. Look. More hollow men were coming up the trail from below and down from above. We were surrounded by an army of coal dust ghosts, all wearing the faces of men who'd died in these mountains over the past 60 years. Not just miners now, but hikers who'd gotten lost, hunters who'd fallen down hidden shafts, anyone who'd died alone in these hills. And they were all singing that same song. The students, I said to the supervisor, let them go. They didn't know what they were doing. Too late for that, he replied. They're part of the shift now. But they're not suffering, if that's what you're worried about. Down in the deep tunnels, there's no pain, no fear, no memory of what came before. He gestured to the hollow men surrounding us. We take care of our own. Dr. Morrison was crying now, quiet tears running down her cheeks. I could smell her fear like metal in the air, mixing with the coal dust that seemed to be everywhere now. There's another way, the supervisor said. You could join us willingly. Become a supervisor yourself. Help us keep watch over what's sleeping below. His coal ember eyes fixed on mine. Help us make sure it never wakes up completely. Behind him, the mine entrance was glowing now with an orange light that pulsed like a heartbeat. And from somewhere deep underground, I could hear something else moving. Something much bigger than hollow men. Something that was starting to wake up. What is it? I asked, staring at that pulsing orange glow. What's down there? The supervisor hollow man's expression changed, becoming almost sad. Something old. Older than these mountains. Older than anything that's got a name. The Cherokee called it Kituwa and V, the ancient hunger. It sleeps deep, dreams deep, and when it dreams, the rock itself comes alive. As if summoned by his words, the ground beneath us heaved upward like a giant chest taking a breath. Dr. Morrison lost her footing and fell to her knees, her hands sinking into earth that had turned soft as clay. The mine disaster in 1923, I said, pieces clicking together. You didn't die in a cave-in. You found this thing. We dug too deep, the supervisor confirmed. Found chambers that weren't made by human hands, filled with air that tasted like copper and time. Jeremiah was the first to realize we needed to stop, needed to seal it all back up. But the company men wouldn't listen. Profits before safety, they said. The hollow men around us were getting more solid, more real. I could see the details of their faces now, the worry lines, the coal dust permanently ground into their skin, the way their eyes held memories of families they'd never see again. So we made a choice, the supervisor continued. Better to become hollow men guarding the deep places than to let that thing wake up and hollow out the whole world. Dr. Morrison was trying to stand, but her hands and knees were sinking deeper into the suddenly liquid ground. Marcus, she gasped, help me. I reached for her, but my own feet were starting to sink. The earth was pulling us down, trying to drag us to wherever Jake, Amy, and Sarah had been taken. Don't fight it, the supervisor said gently. The joining doesn't hurt. One moment you're afraid, the next you're home. And you'll never be alone again. All of us, working together, keeping watch forever. That's when I understood. The hollow men weren't trying to hurt us. They were trying to save us in the only way they knew how. Turn us into guardians like themselves. Add us to their eternal watch over something that must never be allowed to wake. But I thought about my grandmother's stories, about the Cherokee who'd lived in these mountains for thousands of years before the miners came. They'd known about the ancient hunger too, and they'd found a different way to keep it sleeping. Sunlight. I fumbled in my gear bag for my emergency flares. The red ones would burn bright, but the white phosphorus ones burned like miniature suns. My fingers closed around the familiar cylinder just as the ground tried to suck me down to my waist. "I'm sorry," I told the supervisor and pulled the flare's ignition cord. White light exploded across the ridge like a solar flare, bright enough to turn night into day. The hollow men screamed, not in pain but in fear and desperation. The light wasn't hurting them so much as dispersing them, breaking the connection that held their coal dust bodies together. "No!" the supervisor shouted as his form began to fade. "You don't understand. Without us to keep watch, it will—" His voice cut off as the light consumed him. All around us, hollow men were dissolving into wisps of coal dust that the mountain wind scattered like smoke. The ground solidified under our feet, dropping Dr. Morrison and me hard onto solid rock. But the orange glow from the mine entrance was getting brighter, and the breathing sound was cha-na-cha. Jing, getting faster, more excited. Something was waking up. I helped Dr. Morrison to her feet and lit a second flare. "We have to get to the mine," I said. "The students might still be alive down there." "Are you insane?" she gasped. "After what we just saw?" "The hollow men were keeping that thing asleep," I said, understanding flooding through me. "Without them, we're going to have bigger problems than lost students." We ran toward the mine entrance, flares held high like torches. The orange glow was pulsing faster now, and I could hear something moving in the deep tunnels. Something enormous, shifting and stretching after a very long sleep. At the mine entrance, I could hear voices echoing up from below. Jake, Amy, and Sarah were still singing, but their song was different now. Urgent. Warning. Down, down, down in the ground, where the ancient hunger wakes. Run, run, run from the sound, for the mountain breaks. They're trying to warn us, I realized. The hollow men didn't trap them. They were trying to teach them the song, teach them how to be guardians. Dr. Morrison grabbed my arm. "Then let's get them and get out of here." But as we started into the tunnel, the ground shook with something that wasn't breathing anymore. It was footsteps. Huge ones. Coming up from very far below. The ancient hunger was awake. The rescue took 6 minutes that felt like 6 hours. Racing through tunnels lit by flare light, following the sound of singing voices, we found Jake, Amy, and Sarah in a deep chamber carved from living rock. They were alive, but changed. Their eyes held the same coal ember glow as the hollow men, and their voices carried harmonies that echoed off stone walls with impossible acoustics. They didn't want to leave. "We have to keep singing," Sarah said, her voice hollow but urgent. "The song keeps it sleeping. The hollow men taught us the words." But that... The hollow men were gone now, scattered by the flares, and the ancient hunger was stirring in chambers far below. We could feel it moving, something vast and patient and hungry, testing the boundaries of its long prison. I used my last flare to light our way out, half carrying Amy, while Dr. Morrison helped Jake and Sarah. Behind us, the mountain itself groaned like a living thing, and orange light pulsed from cracks in the tunnel walls. We made it to the surface just as the mine entrance collapsed. Not a natural cave-in, but something deliberate. The mountain sealing itself, buying time until new guardians could take over the watch. The students recovered over the following weeks, though they never quite lost that echo in their voices. They transferred to other schools, other studies. Sometimes I get Christmas cards from them, always signed with a few bars of that mining song. Dr. Morrison published a paper about seismic instabilities in abandoned mining regions. She never mentioned what we really saw up there. Neither did I in my official report. But I know the truth. The Cherokee were right about the ancient hunger. The hollow men were right about needing guardians. And my grandmother was right about listening to the old stories. I've been back to Whispering Gap Ridge 47 times since that November day. The mine entrance stays sealed, but sometimes I can hear singing coming from the rock itself. New voices joining the old ones. Volunteers taking up the watch. I've trained my replacement now, a young ranger named David Clearwater. Cherokee on his mother's side, like me. He knows the old stories, respects them. When I retire next year, he'll take over the Whispering Gap patrols. Because someone has to keep watch. Someone always has to keep watch. The mountains are patient, but they're not empty. And some things that sleep shouldn't be allowed to wake. Last week, the geology department at the university requested permission to study the unusual mineral formations near Pond Creek. I denied their permit. Some secrets are worth keeping buried. But late at night, when the wind is right, you can still hear them singing in the deep places. The hollow men and the students they taught, keeping the ancient hunger dreaming with old mining songs and Cherokee lullabies. Down, down, down in the ground, where the coal seams run so deep. The song never really ends. It just finds new voices to carry the tune. And sometimes, on foggy November mornings when I'm walking the trails around Whispering Gap, I swear I can see them, transparent figures in mining helmets and work clothes, standing guard at sealed entrances, making sure the mountain keeps its secrets. My grandfather would be proud. The watch continues.